Japanimation Station.
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. This week on the show, we are continuing our journey with the wonderful Lupin III, but we are saying goodbye to the Red Jacket, and we're saying goodbye to the 1970s. Hello, Pink Jacket. Hello, 1980s. It is Lupin III, Part 3, The Pink Jacket Adventures here on Japanimation Station.
Wait, this stuff aired in the 80s? How did you know that? How would you know if you just watched the show?
I watched the first 30 seconds and I was like, oh, right. I hadn't thought about the fact that we're in the 80s now. It's like,
Yes.
Obviously I technically knew the show was made in the 80s. Then you watch 30 seconds, you're like, you hear sexy adventure, you see the pink jacket in action, you see the wonderful fashion of Pops in this show, and you're like, oh, yes, we are definitely in the 80s now.
We are in the 80s, and we are talking today about what was the last regular TV series for Lupin III until 2012, when The Woman Called Fujiko Mine aired. And that is Lupin III Part 3, the first show that actually had the part title on it when it aired, now known as The Pink Jacket Adventures, because he wears a sexy pink jacket, and it looks cool, and it's very 80s. And this is a show that aired for 50 episodes. We will be talking about a selection of those episodes today, same as we did with Part 2. And we will also be talking about the movie that came out during the Part 3 run, and is much more of like the Part 3 movie than either of the first two movies were the Part 2 movie, because neither of those movies, Cagliostro or Mystery of Mamo, are all that connected to Part 2 as an enterprise. This one is the Part 3 movie, and it is Lupin III, The Legend of the Gold of Babylon from 1985. So we will talk about all of that on today's jam-packed show, talking about the pink jacket era of Lupin, which is, in many ways, in the West at least, the most obscure. It did not have any kind of official release for a long time. The show was never dubbed. The movie was dubbed when Discotek put it out on Blu-ray in 2018 with the classic Lupin cast with Tony Oliver and Richard Epcar and all those people. But it has much more been kind of under the radar. It did not do super well on its release, so TMS kind of went in a different direction after this. But I think it has been getting more of a critical reappraisal in recent years, it would be fair to say, especially because it is now on Blu-ray from Discotek and it is easier to find. It's on Crunchyroll as well. And I think it deserves it because this show is fucking wild.
Yeah, it is a great show. I would definitely say it's the weakest of the three we've watched. Like, I do think for me, it doesn't have, of what we saw, it doesn't have as many, like, all-time classic masterpiece episodes as Part 2 did. Or like, you know, the sort of insanity of Part 1 and everything that went in with that project and the kind of seminal thing that Part 1 is. But that being said, Part 3 is still a great show. And I think it has such a cool sense of what it is trying to be. It is wild how sort of like varied it is in style and particularly in aesthetics. Sometimes that can lead to like maybe like aesthetic stuff for some episodes that you don't love so much, but other episodes are just like go for something totally different and it's amazing. And I really appreciated that it goes for tonally something similar to the early Part 1 episodes. That feels like a really intentional choice to bring in some more of that edge that show had. And yeah, it is a really good show. Probably not as good as those other two, but those are two like all-time great anime. And this is a show well worth checking out if there are Lupin fans that have not gotten onto the pink jacket yet.
Yeah, it's like the only way this is not a great show is by the standards set by part 1 and 2, but that's a ridiculously high bar. This is a great anime. I mean, like, the number of hits in the ones we saw is still ridiculously high. Even the misses, and this is like my overall thesis on Lupin III so far, Sean, is that even the misses are more interesting than a lot of shows' hits. Because, boy, it is an interesting show, even when it's kind of not coming together. I think it gets better as it goes along. I do think the early episodes feel a bit like kind of recycled part 2 mixed with kind of an edge of part 1, but don't quite come together. And I think as it gets its legs under it and becomes more experimental, it starts getting really interesting a lot of the time. And the animation is something that's just super interesting to talk about and like frequently really great. And great in a way very different than it was in part 1 or 2. But yeah, it's a really interesting show. And then there's a movie that's weird as all fucking hell.
Oh, yeah. I think maybe the most wild fucking thing we have seen yet in Lupin III happens at the end of that movie. That's saying something, because we had all the Jesus stuff in part 2. We had Mamo in the Mamo movie. We had the time traveler, also Mamo, in part 1. So there's been some pretty insane shit that happens. Some really wild shit goes down at the end of that Babylon movie.
And the thing is, there's a lot in this episode, Sean, because part 3 also has an episode involving a dolphin falling in love with Lupin. There's an episode written by Seijun Suzuki that is basically an assault on the concept of narrative itself. This is definitely a weird era of Lupin. If you, like us, were super jazzed by all the weird Jesus stuff from part 2, you should make it your mission to watch part 3, because it has a lot of stuff in that vein, and I do love it for that. I mean, this is on episode 1 of this season, Sean. I told you when we were talking about the time travel episode, just sometimes this franchise loses its mind. And I feel like this episode I'm being proven very right, because this era of Lupin loses its mind pretty frequently, and I love it.
Yeah, it is a great show.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we dive into some of the history behind Lupin III Part 3, which is actually going to take us on a detour through an entirely different show? There's a lot to go through here, Sean.
Yes, you have more on your notes than I thought there would be, based on what I saw when I did like my very light cursory research around the edges of this show. But there was, a pretty notable break between part 2 and Cagliostro and part 3. So I guess it makes sense that a lot goes into this show coming back.
Yeah, so we're going to, just so you know, for like the first half of today, we're going to focus on the TV show and all of that stuff. We will come back around to the movie, The Legend of the Gold of Babylon, at the end with a couple of mentions throughout. But let's go on sort of the TV track. So Lupin III Part 2 went off the air in October 1980 to massive ratings. Its final episode is one of the most high-rated episodes in Japanese history. It had been a huge success throughout. They obviously had plenty of episodes for reruns, 155 of those. So there's like no immediate pressure to go do a bunch more Lupin material from TMS. But they did start thinking about next steps. And the first project they got involved with was not the show that would become Part 3, the Pink Jacket show. It was something entirely different. As we've already discussed a couple of times, TMS did really have an interest in getting Lupin out there in the West. They had dubbed The Mystery of Mamo into English domestically in 1979. They had sent out that subtitled print of Cagliostro to America in 1980. And TMS did a lot of international co-productions. Telecom, the studio that did Cagliostro and a bunch of the Best Part 2 episodes, would go on to animate much of Batman the Animated Series, for instance. So TMS is definitely a Japanese studio that does a lot around the world with other animation. So it stood to reason that this would be an interest for them. In 1981, so a year after Part 2, TMS signed a partnership with the French studio DIC, or DIC. I call it DIC because if you've seen any of those shows, they made a ton back in the day, like all of the Sonic the Hedgehog shows, and they had their little logo at the end would go DIC, and so that's how I think of it. It stands for Division.
I just call it French Studio Dick. That's that's just, to me, it's Studio Dick. That's just, I'm going with my American pronunciation, and I think that's fine.
Okay, Studio
You could also
Dick.
call it Studio Richard.
Yeah. Tricky Dick. It stood for Division Information Communications. DIC, as I said, would come to be known for the animated series of its American arm in the 1980s, including Inspector Gadget, The Care Bears, The Real Ghostbusters, all of the Sonic shows of that era, and all of the Nintendo shows like Zelda and the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. So very prolific. At the time, though, 1981, they were very new, they were very French. DIC and TMS established a partnership for DIC to do overseas animation subcontracting for TMS, starting with a 26-episode Greek mythology show called Ulysses 31 that aired in Japan, aired in France, aired in other places around the world. And they also began work on a project TMS planned to be the breakthrough Lupin series in the West, Lupin VIII. Had you heard about this before, like, last week, Sean?
No, I mean, I had when we started doing Lupin podcasts, like, I saw this pop up occasionally when looking around online, but no, before we started doing the Lupin podcast, the notion of Lupin VIII had not yet entered my brain.
This really rocked my world when I read about it. The idea behind Lupin VIII is that it would feature future descendants, obviously, of the Lupin III cast in new roles that would be more family-friendly. So Lupin VIII, unlike his great, I don't know how many, unlike Lupin III, is a detective. He's not a thief. And now we would be in a setting where they could adhere to U.S. broadcast standards, where they can't show blood, they can't show killing or sex or swearing. The U.S. has much, much more restrictive content policies than Japan or much of the world. And they got some heavy hitters for this. This was not like some weird slum-in-it production. The infamous anime director Rin Taro, fresh off the film version of Galaxy Express 999, is hired to direct, with Shingo Araki, who is the animation director and character designer on shows like Tomorrow's Joe, Cutie Honey, and the Galaxy Express show, was the character designer. So it's no slouch in that department. And they put 6 episodes into production. The first finished all animation, music, and sound effects. The only thing left was voice work, so it was almost done, and they were working on these other episodes. But, they're making a Lupin show with the French company DIC, planned to air in France, as well as in the US and Japan. And suddenly, the rights issues with Maurice LeBlanc's estate that we have been talking about all season, that TMS had successfully skirted in Japan and in Italy, where Lupin was also very popular, they were unavoidable now, because they're in France. The LeBlanc estate was willing to license the Arsène Lupin name, but for a fee that was higher than TMS or DIC felt that they could pay, so the series was scuttled and abandoned. But years later, in 2012, there was a special DVD and Blu-ray collection that came out called Lupin III Master File. And it had a bunch of goodies in it, including it has a little OVA that is the last time Goro Naya, Makio Inoue, and Masayama, the voice of Fujiko, voiced those characters in the show. So it was kind of a tribute to the end of an era. And it also included the unreleased Lupin VIII pilot, that is, again, completely finished, other than it does not have a theme song or end credits, and it does not have spoken dialogue yet, because they hadn't dubbed that in. So what they did is they layered subtitles on where the dialogue would go. But you can find this, you can watch it, people have done fan subs of it, and you can see Lupin VIII, and we need to talk about it, because it's a fucking thing, Sean.
Jonathan, I forgot to watch this. I'm sorry.
You forgot to watch this?
With me. Yes, you texted me about this forever ago. I'm skimming through the episode right now in our shared Google Doc.
That's okay. Do you want me to tell the kids about it, Sean? Because it's wild.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
First off, this is Lupin VIII, and it is like in the continuity, so it's in the future. This is a show set in space. They got Galaxy Express 999 people to do it. The show begins with a very obvious Gundam 79 homage, and this is not just, haha, we're the Gundam people. It's very obviously an homage to the beginning of Gundam 79, where it's this narrator talking. I mean, we don't know what the narrator would have sounded like. We have the text. But it's a narrator talking about mankind emigrating to space via colonies. It even has this horn song that sounds like it's a takeoff on the music that opens Gundam. Very similar visual language with these long pans across the colonies. But the setting of the show is this future sort of sci-fi version of our world. There's a lot of stuff on colonies. The colonies are linked together by all these sort of like branching space elevators and things. It's really like, I actually think on a production design level, it's really compelling. You've got new versions of all of the character designs. Some of them are very close. Jigen and Goemon and Zenigata are fundamentally similar to how they've always looked. Lupin VIII is a little freshened up. He's more fresh-faced and youthful. He's got more of like a little kind of curly hair afro going on. And he has a red jacket, but it's less of a sports jacket now. And so he looks a little more family-friendly as a hero. And of course, he is a private detective with Daisuke Jigen. I assume this is Daisuke Jigen the Fifth. If we are at Lupin VIII, then I guess it is Daisuke Jigen the Fifth, and I guess it's Goemon Ishikawa the 18th is my guess for all of this. And that would make Heiji Zenigata, he was the 6th, so this would be Zenigata the 11th, and Fujiko Mine the 5th. This Lupin is still obsessed with Fujiko Mine, which did make me wonder, they must be related on some level, right? Because if Lupin, multiple generations of Lupins and multiple generations of Fujikos have been in a constant state of sexual attraction, I do wonder if those bloodlines have not mixed at some point, but that's neither here nor there.
No, their fate is to be attracted to each other, but like it just never goes anywhere. And we learned in Lupin the Third Part 3 that Lupin probably has lots of children around that he doesn't know about.
That's true.
That scenario comes up, and they're like, yeah, it could totally be true. So, I think that's just their destiny to always be attracted and yet never have it come together.
Yes. So as I said, this Lupin is a private detective with his partner Daisuke Jigen the Fifth, and Jigen cannot smoke cigarettes anymore because this was going to be on American TV, so he uses lollipops. And that made me laugh very hard because if you were someone who watched American like dubs and edits of an anime, shows used to do that, including famously the 4Kids dub of One Piece, where they did the same thing to Sanji and just had, which is tough because Sanji is smoking in every frame of One Piece that he is in, so they had to replace that with a lollipop. I do enjoy Jigen takes off that lollipop wrapper real stylishly. Jigen is still a sharpshooter. He doesn't kill anyone. He shoots some robots. He does shoot a tracker onto a spaceship at one point. The main plot of this first episode is about a little girl named Alice who comes in and delivers the sharpest fucking burn. She says, "So you're Lupin?" And he says, "That's me." And she says, "Huh, so my teacher tells the truth once in a while. He said humans used to be monkeys." Goddamn, little girl. That is a burn. That is a burn. It's great. But anyway, she has a music box that she inherited from her dad's grandpa, Willie Dream. And Willie Dream has been in hibernation for 100 years and is going to be revived soon and wants Lupin to go find the tomb where they will find the cryogenically frozen body of Willie Dream. And this comes out to a story where we learn that Willie Dream was a diamond thief who stole all of these diamonds, hid them on the moon, and then froze himself so that he could escape the statute of limitations and come out in 100 years and get the diamonds back. But Jigen does tell us at one point that laws were changed. I guess enough people did this that the statute of limitations does freeze if you go into cryo. So Willie Dream does get arrested at the end by Zenigata, who is here. I'm very curious in the actual show what role Zenigata would have played, because what it is here is that he and Lupin and Jigen are on like decent terms. They are sort of friendly, but Zenigata is wary of Lupin and is like, "You have thief blood in your family." And Lupin is trying to convince him, "No, I'm a good guy now." But they have no conflict because they are on the same side of the law. So I'm curious what that would have looked like. Fujiko is very much playing her like sort of normal Fujiko mode where she is not part of the gang but is off trying to like do her own jobs, but she and Lupin flirt a lot. And then Goemon is the one used least in this show, but he does have some good stuff here. The main thing they do is that they leave the little girl Alice with Goemon, who is meditating in what looks like a version of the holodeck, like the holodeck when it's off and there's nothing on. And when Goemon does jump into action at the end and he does his big move, he gets in full samurai gear. And so he has like an actual like samurai outfit in this show. Honestly, it's a pretty good show. I would watch this. It is like, it's weird to say because the setting is so different. It is still recognizably TMS's Lupin III, just now as Lupin VIII. You know, toned down for kids, but it is still the show. It does not have Yuji Ono. It's a different composer. The animation has a lot of differences to it, obviously. But it's interesting. It's not a bad show. And if you can track down the pilot, not hard. Again, people have fan subbed it as well. I would take a look at this. It is an interesting little show. And I'm so curious about this whole period where this all, like, what if they had made a deal with Maurice LeBlanc's estate and Lupin had like made it big in the US as Lupin VIII? and then like you and I would have been watching it on Cartoon Network and learning, wait, there was a Lupin the Third. History could have been very different.
Yeah, it is wild. Yeah, because again, I'm just kind of thumbing through the file you shared with me, and it does like it just looks like an anime. Like it's not in my head. I kind of pictured something more Americanized in terms of aesthetic. Maybe something more in your kind of like G.I. Joe or He-Man territory. Is like, nope, this, like, other than like some of like the silly things like Jigen having a lollipop, which is hilarious.
Yes.
It just looks like it could be any other Lupin show. Just happens to be set in space, which honestly is not that outside the realm of possibility for Lupin anyways, right? It's like for the default setting, It's a bit of a deviation, but Lupin goes fucking crazy all the time. So you can have a weird Lupin but in space show, and that would totally work.
Yeah, they should. I would love to see them do something with this. Like, one, it would be hilarious if they ever got, like, the current Lupin cast to dub this thing and, like, do the voices for it. That would be very funny. I would love to hear, like, Kenichi Kurita and Miyuki Sawashiro doing this or something. But, like, I would love them to see, like, a one-off OVA where they, like, revive the Lupin the Eighth project and do something with it. That would be very funny. I mean, they always need ideas. You know, Lupin, it lives forever. There will always need to be new content. I think they should do something with this at some point because it's weird, but I think it's interesting. And I kind of like the idea of Lupin, but a private detective, because, like, you realize it doesn't actually fundamentally shift things too much. You can still do it in an interesting way and make him a distinct character. It's funny.
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, this is like a really interesting era for animation, like international animation, because you had lots of stuff like that, right? And you had weird projects. Like there was a aborted project that was like going to use the SD Gundam designs but make into like an American cartoon. That happened at one point. You obviously had like all the wild shit that happened with Macross and Robotech. It was just like such a weird period where things were not accessible internationally, and so you could reuse and repackage different properties in weird ways. I think the thing to me that's like the biggest question mark about Lupin the Eighth, from the point of view of imagining, if it had happened and we saw reruns of it on Cartoon Network and stuff like that, well, Lupin the Third still wouldn't have been out over here. So it's like the connection to Lupin the Third for the potential Western audience would be completely non-existent, which is kind of a weird thing conceptually, but it would have been cool if this thing had actually happened.
Yeah. But it did not happen. They did have to abandon it. And, Rintaro went off and did lots of other big stuff. So it's all good. But then TMS is left holding the bag. Now what do we do with Lupin the Third? Well, backing up a bit, just to remind everyone, the first Lupin the Third TV show, Part 1, Green Jacket, 1971, that had been produced for and aired on Yomiuri TV, YTV, while Part 2 had been made for Nippon TV, NTV. YTV had been a pretty small network in 1971. It was smaller, it was growing. This is part of why Part 1 was allowed to be so different, is it was a network kind of getting into the game more than it was something like with an established brand. But obviously, it has gotten much bigger in the decades since, more on par with the popular NTV. And of course, they had seen NTV get a really popular show out of Lupin the Third Part 2. According to the writer Yuichiro Oguro in a 2009 article for Anime Style, YTV was quite proud of having been involved in that first Lupin series, which had in the years since become very popular in reruns. Obviously a classic and beloved show. So now that TMS wasn't doing anything else with Lupin, they wanted a new show. And they wanted it to be distinct from Part 2. They didn't just want TMS to come in and make more episodes of Part 2 but air them on YTV. They wanted something new and different, which might be one reason why Yuzo Aoki was brought in to do Part 2, because he had been, or Part 3, he had been heavily involved all the way back to Part 1. Yuzo Aoki, if you do not remember, was the head, he is on Part 3, the head animation and character designer, and he is the de facto director of Part 3. There is no series director credited on this show, but Aoki more or less filled this role and is clearly the lead creative voice on the series. We have seen this guy before. He was the talented young key animator on Part 1. Very young. He was like 19 working on that show, who did impressive scenes like the driving in the first episode ever, is Lupin Burning. He also worked on Part 2, and then he took a leading role on Mystery of Mamo as the character designer and co-animation director. So it seemed natural that at some point he would step up to the plate and lead this thing. Yeah, and the long ties to Lupin and everything makes him an obvious choice. And he is, as we say, the kind of key figure here on Part 3. So what does that mean? He takes a very unique approach to character design for this series, favoring sort of a looser and freer hand. An animation director's job is usually to assure uniformity in design amongst the different animators. So you'll have a lot of people animating one set of characters, and you want it to all look uniform. And that is usually what the animation director does. But Aoki was more open to letting different animators experiment. He said, as an animation director on Part 3, I hope I'll be able to capture the originality of each production team. As such, I want to make the art flexible, and even if I have to restrain my drawings at the beginning, I expect each staff member to express his originality once he gets accustomed to it. He also famously claimed to be aiming for a Neapolitan ice cream approach to the Lupin character, with 3 basic designs for him: a hard design, a soft design, and a comical design that you could use at different points depending on the needs of the script. So the character designs he comes up with for the series' first half are really pretty distinct from what Yasuo Otsuka had done on Part 1, and then Part 2 is largely drawing on the Otsuka designs. They really go back to the Monkey Punch manga designs in many ways. They give Lupin and Goemon more pronounced chins. They show Jigen's face and eyes more often. And I think Fujiko gets what is by far her strongest and most consistent character design she has had to date, especially paying attention sort of to the hair. I actually really like this set of character designs that Aoki comes up with. I think they're really good and strong. And again, Fujiko, like, it's kind of night and day. It's like the first really good design she's had.
Yeah, and then it also follows with, like, the approach of the show uses Fujiko much more heavily than Part 2 did.
Yes.
She just feels like a much more prominent character and uses her in similar ways to what Part 1 did. So yeah, like, I agree. I really like the character designs. I think Goemon was the one that it took me the longest to get used to because he's got the butt chin on him is kind of weird. But yeah, Fujiko looks great. Lupin looks great. And I like the approach of that Lupin's character shifts, like his visual approach shifts sometimes like scene to scene. It's not just like, oh, this is an episode that has the sort of more handsome, rugged-looking, big-chinned Lupin, and this is the one that has the more comic-looking. It's like, no, scene by scene, depending on what the scene is asking for, he'd be drawn in different ways. And it takes a little bit to get used to, but I thought that that was an interesting approach. And it's such a sort of wacky series in the first place that it like, honestly works way better than I think you would think, based on how that's described. Like, because I had heard or read about this element before I watched the show, and was like, that sounds like a cool idea that maybe wouldn't work in practice, but I think more often than not, it did really work for me in the show.
And I think it works better as it goes along, too, because everything starts shifting pretty heavily in the series' second half. The team, in part because they were working on the movie, The Legend of the Gold of Babylon, simultaneously with the show, and there wasn't quite as clear a demarcation of duties as there was when Cagliostro was made, and Telecom just went off and made that, and just didn't work on Part 2. Everyone working on that movie was also working on things for the show. It was all commingled. It was really crazy and stressful. And so one result of that is that the team begins going for much simpler, more pared down designs that are easier and faster to draw. In 1999, Aoki looked back and said, I think it got solid from only about episode 25. It became more and more simple, and we obtained a simple yet satisfying result from the second half. And I think he's right about that. I think that simple but satisfying result, the show just gets, I don't know what else to say than rubbery. It gets like very crazy. It gets very kind of Looney Tunes. There's a lot of clear influences from Western, like theatrical cartoons of like the Looney Tunes era, Friz Freeling. I've always kind of thought of Lupin in line with the Pink Panther cartoons because of the jazz connection, Henry Mancini on those and Ono on this. But there really is a big connection. If you've ever seen those Pink Panther cartoons, boy, there's a lot of, like, I think, like, conscious influence here on this half of part 3. And you even have the opening is reanimated, keeps the same song, Sexy Adventure, but it has a new animation that is was apparently done entirely by Aoki, that was noted for its, quote, wild and loose animation that seemed to be channeling Monkey Punch's dynamic drawings. And I think it's super fucking cool. And very much is a good, like, kind of thesis statement for what they're going to do here. And this is about as late, 1984, as I think you're going to get an anime that still has significant influence from, like, American theatrical cartoons, like the Fleischer Brothers and Friz Freleng, because you're still dealing with first-generation animators like Aoki, who was very young in 71, but still working with all those people, who those are some of their major inspirations. Of course, around this time in anime, you're going to get a lot of people entering the industry like, you know, Hideaki Anno or someone whose main inspirations are other anime, and so those Western influences really fall by the wayside, but they're still here, and I think used really creatively.
Yeah. I will say for me, like, I liked the second half, and I think probably he is right that I think it gets more consistently good, but I also do, I think he's being too hard on himself in classic animator fashion about, like, that first half and it only getting solid from the second half. Like, I think the first half, the more kind of hard-edged look for it, really works. And there is something that when we start talking about the episodes, something that the show does lose in the second half aesthetically that the first half has, is that the supporting characters of the side cast in the first half have the best designs of the side cast characters. That, like, the characters that show up in just that one episode, like the villain of the week kind of characters, those I think are by far the strongest in the first half of part 3 that this series has ever consistently had, partially because it has that much more rugged, detailed character design approach that makes them very unique, and I was a little bit disappointed to see that element go away in the second half when it goes for the slightly more uniform, rubbery kind of Looney Tunes style design that I think works overall for those episodes. And obviously there's a lot of good animation reasons that works out well, but it does mean that some of the character designs get flattened out a bit and you lose the, like, you know, like Death Garv is a character that couldn't exist in that rubbery animation in the second half. That's one of the best character designs of this series. So I do think he's a little bit hard on himself. I think there are charms to the first half that the second half doesn't have. But that, to me, with part 3, creates an effect kind of like Lupin VIII Part 1, where you get this show that evolves in both of the flavors it has, the Neapolitan ice cream kind of thing. Like, they're all satisfying. I like strawberry ice cream and I like chocolate ice cream. And so it's fun to have them both, in the show reinvigorates itself by stylistically shifting, and that's the thing for me that I like about part 3. Not so much that it gets better as it goes along, but that it keeps itself fresh by changing.
I think that's correct. I would agree. And when I've said, I find some of the stories and stuff maybe more interesting in part 2, or in the second half of the show. But I do agree. I mean, there's some amazing animation, and I think those basic character designs in the first half are some of the best we've seen. You know, I think the basic kind of Yasuo Otsuka look is probably like the definitive kind of look of Lupin in animation. But I really like these, and I like how they kind of harken back to the manga designs. I like, as you say, the more rugged sense. You know, Fujiko is much improved. I love the fucking color work on Zenigata's coat and everything here. I think looks super cool. I don't love Jigen's costume in this show, I have to admit. I do think it's like weirdly like popsicle colored, and I don't know if it fits for Jigen as well. But I do think for like Zenigata, it looks great.
Yeah. No, I agree that probably like Jigen's look is probably the weakest of the redesigns.
Although, here's another thing I like about the early episodes, is you do see Jigen's eyes more, which is something that is Monkey Punch does that. That is more, the idea that we only kind of ever see Jigen in profile is more of an anime thing. And I do like seeing some drawings of him that harken back to the manga a little bit more. They do abandon that pretty soon in the Part 3 anime and go back to sort of the Part 1, Part 2 look where his eyes are always hidden, which is good too, obviously. I just kind of like the difference of seeing that early in these episodes.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much, it's like it's the variety is the spice of life thing. It's fun to see the different takes and see the series evolve, which is what Part 3 offers here.
Yeah. And of course, we can't go any further if we don't talk about the fucking jacket, because it is pink and it is cool. TMS reportedly asked YTV when they started working on the series if they wanted the jacket to be green again, because that had been the color on part 1 that YTV had aired. And YTV said they were fine with any color other than red. It just couldn't be red because that was the part 2 color. They wanted to make a splash and have it be distinct. Now, Aoki had pitched this as the White Jacket series. You had seen the White Jacket one other time in the 1974 live-action film Strange Psychokinetic Strategy, where Lupin does wear a white jacket in that show. TMS, however, vetoed this as being too extreme a change, that Lupin had to have some color on his jacket, and so Aoki compromised because white plus red equals pink, and that pink jacket looks real sexy.
Yeah, I think going for pink is probably the right idea. I think white sounds cool if it was like a movie. I think that would have been hard to pull off on a TV show and have that consistently look good on the character. And I think pink just it pops really well. It's a good look, and it just fits the very 80s poppy color scape of this overall show. And yeah, like the pink, it just immediately, I think the aesthetic of the show snaps into place around that pink jacket.
Yeah, well, it is such a colorful show. That is something I love about this series. Its color setting and color work is some of the best we've seen out of Lupin, and it is 80s as all hell. It is just so embracing kind of the era and the crazy neon colors, and I do love it. All right, in terms of music, we did get Yuji Ono back, performing this time with a band called Super Sexual Transport, or SST. So you see that in the credits, and it's great. The one downside is that since this was on YTV, they couldn't use the absolutely enormous body of work Ono had made for Part 2, including the iconic Lupin III theme. All of that was owned by the music arm of NTV, so Part 3 is the only Ono-composed Lupin series lacking that theme or a lot of the other iconic compositions. I do see sometimes people today complain about Ono sort of reusing melodies too much. I think the thing to understand is Yuji Ono is a jazz musician, and jazz musicians write pieces and then perform them 50 different times because that's what jazz is, and it's a little different every time, right? Thelonious Monk did not record Straight No Chaser one time. He did it a lot of times. And I do think the score for Part 3 is fantastic. Sometimes I feel like Ono has not gone back to this music that much other than Manhattan Joke, which is the big song from the movie. And I think a lot of this music is great. I think you can tell he maybe had less enthusiasm for it because he was suddenly cut off from the 4-year giant body of work he had created. But I do like it. And I think the vocal theme, Sexy Adventure by Yusuke Nakamura, is fucking great. Just such a good theme song. And maybe I think the only Lupin theme that does not have the words Lupin III sung as part of the lyrics.
Yes, or at least the only one we've had so far. There might be, an obscure OVA somewhere that abandons the we have to sing Lupin III in the theme song. Yeah, I really like the music. I think, honestly, it works for the show that they don't go for the same style of music, right?
Yeah.
The classic Lupin theme does come back in the movie Legend of Gold Babylon. We'll talk about that when we get there. But I do think it helps that the whole show has so stylistically moved into this very 80s era, because we're smack dab in the middle of the 80s, right? We're 84, 85. So it's full on, the 80s are an aesthetic thing at this point. And I think it fits that the music also follows with that trend. And I think it works really well for the show. Sexy Adventure is a great 80s anime opener. The ending theme is also very good and is reminds me a lot of good 80s enders, Romantic Agerio from Dragon Ball. It reminds me a lot of that song. So it just, it as someone who really likes 80s anime, I feel like it just moves into that whole musical space very nicely. And I like the kind of slightly more synthy feel the soundtrack has sometimes. I wouldn't want this for every Lupin thing. And in fact, I don't think I would really want this soundtrack on another Lupin thing because it's so of its moment. But it is of its moment. And so it's nice to kind of move away from the familiar themes for a little bit and get something different.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I want to be clear. It's a great score. It is a cut above almost all anime music. It's just so, because Yuji Ono is just one of the best to ever do this. And I did spend the morning listening to the Legend of the Gold of Babylon soundtrack, which is a lot of original music and then a lot of music from the show. And it's an all-timer. It might actually be the best soundtrack of any of those first three movies, just because like the mix of new stuff is like so heavy, and it has actually two big theme songs in it. It's very cool. But it is interesting if you are a big Yuji Ono fan. This is the most different Lupin work he's ever done, is for this show, and that is kind of a cool thing. All right, in terms of the broadcast of this series of Part 3, it premiered on March 3rd, 1984, and I do like if you watch like the promos for the show where Yasuo Yamada is announcing like, hey, we're back, guys, they do this big 3-3 thing for Lupin III Part 3. It was all threes. It was very funny, nice synergy there. The show was popular, to be clear. This was not like a bomb or anything. It was popular enough that it was initially just planned for 26 episodes. It got doubled to 52. That got cut back a little to 50 later on. But the show's broadcast suffered less from any problems with the series itself than from a series of really significant preemptions, because it was scheduled in a slot where baseball aired. And if you know anything about the people of Japan, they like their baseball. And so once the season was in full swing, this series got preempted a lot. The show debuted on March 3rd, 1984, but only one episode aired in April and 2 in May. So right out the gate, it was getting preempted a ton. No episodes aired in August or September at all. And there were a bunch of delays. Like episode 18 was aired in November of 84, but it had been finished in June, which is super unusual for an anime of this era, where you would usually air pretty close to completion. The preemptings did resume the following year in April of 85, not as frequent in the second year of the show's broadcast, but enough to soften the ratings. The run was cut down to 48 episodes, and then they made 2 extras for airing when baseball games were rain delayed. But that didn't happen. And so those last 2 episodes, which we watched, they're the last 2 of the series, they wind up airing much later. Episode 49 on August 31st. Episode 48 was August 31st, 49 was a month later on September 28th, and 50 was on November 6th, unless you lived in Tokyo, which is where a lot of people live, where it aired on Christmas Day. So this show took almost 2 full years to finish airing its episodes, despite being a 50-episode show. And this is why, if you watch through Part 3, the final episode, which is great, it ends in a really weird place. It finishes the episode, and then it comes back up with a series of still images of the cast, and a nice announcer lady, not a member of the cast of the show, says, "Thank you very much for watching all 50 episodes of Lupin III Part 3. The series will be finishing with this episode. We'll see you again sometime. Sayonara." And I think that's kind of an amazing ending that you can tell was, we don't know when this is going to air.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is just like, at the time it was very inexplicable, and I had to look up like, what the fuck is it like? It's very, like an awkward. Just, I guess we're done. It's over. Bye, guys. By the way, this was the last one.
Yes. So that was the run of Part 3. We will talk about the Legend of the Gold of Babylon and all of that, because there's some really interesting stuff there when we go over to that side of things. But yeah. What else should we say about Part 3 before we jump into some of these specific episodes, Sean?
I think we kind of covered it. That it's like, I mean, the thing with the show is that it is 80s as fuck, and it is aesthetically very adventurous, right? It's the way that the aesthetic evolves within episodes and then over the course of the series is very unique. And that to me is like the thing from the big picture perspective that really stands out about this show.
Yeah, it feels like it's got more of that countercultural energy that you saw in early Part 1 stuff. The Seijun Suzuki vibes are back in full force. It's kind of funny, Suzuki was one of the supervisors on Part 2, but I actually think his influence is felt most in like early Part 1 and then all throughout Part 3. Because Part 3, he only works on the TV show for 1 episode, and we will talk about that 1 episode because it is a thing. And then he is a co-director on the film. But I think there's a lot of very clear Seijun Suzuki influences. The way this show uses color is straight out of Tokyo Drifter. I think one of my favorite things about Part 3 is it has a very different approach to background art than Parts 1 or 2, which have much more of kind of the lush almost like Ghibli-esque aesthetic to background art. Part 3 is much softer. It's more kind of like pop art vibes. It's a little watercolory. It's very suggestive. But there's a lot of scenes that, if you've seen Suzuki's movies from the 60s, he often does these things where he'll have kind of incomplete sets that are suggested by kind of lit up walls in the back or something. Tokyo Drifter is famous for this. And a lot of like club scenes in Part 3 do something similar. The beginning of the movie does this very clearly. And I think it's interesting. It does kind of have a little bit of that kind of like countercultural energy to it. Obviously, it has some things carried over from Part 2, like that the main cast is in almost every episode together, some of that kind of stuff. But you do have a little bit more of the anarchical flavor of something like The Mystery of Mamo seeded throughout a little bit more. So it's a really interesting blend of vibes, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, as you say, interesting blend of vibes that very much pulls from Seijun Suzuki, especially in his episode. But it's like, it is from that whole era of Japanese cinema, like early Part 1. It is like very clearly trying to get at the same sort of inspirations that Part 1 had, which is nice after, like, you know, Part 2 would have an occasional episode that kind of went for that, but in general was pretty far from that whole style. I really appreciated Part 3 immediately going like, yeah, let's get back a little bit to that. Let's put more of an edge on Lupin as a character. He is a bastard again. After we had very, very nice heroic Lupin in Cagliostro, it's nice to see him, you know, this is quote unquote nice guy Lupin in this one. That is not actually a nice guy. And I appreciate getting some more of that because I like how much of an asshole he is sometimes.
One side effect of that I did notice, though, is that I do think the show... there was only one episode we saw that does not include the full cast. So this show does generally do the Part 2 thing of having all 5 characters in every episode. And I do think because it's going for something a little different than Part 2, it sometimes struggles to use those characters as well. I think Zenigata suffers here. I think Zenigata is the least well used of the main 5 in this show. It's a big reversal from Part 2, where I think Zenigata is kind of like the fucking anchor point of Part 2 and kind of the engine of that whole show. And here, I think a lot of stories he's very ancillary, and there are a couple where he's used really well. There's, especially near the end, they do more Pops episodes, and some of them are very good. But if it's not sort of a Zenigata focused episode, there's a lot where he kind of comes in and you're like, oh, Pops is in this one. Why? Because there doesn't seem like there's quite a like place for him in the story. Now, the flip side of that is I think Fujiko is used great in this show. Like, they go really hard on the idea that the main unit is Lupin, Jigen, and Goemon. They're buddies. They do stuff together. Fujiko is not part of the gang in this one. She is off doing her own thing. She is often double-crossing them. Sometimes she works together, but it's very clear she does not kind of, like, pal around with them. And so you kind of get a trade-off. I think you get a less interesting take on Zenigata, and you get a much more interesting take on Fujiko than we've had since some of the early Part 1 stuff.
Yeah, I would definitely say that that's what happens here, is that it swaps effectively the roles that Zenigata and Fujiko play, where, yeah, Part 2, Zenigata, like the average episode structure was about, here's our 4 members of the Lupin gang, they're committing some sort of heist or something like that, Zenigata's trying to stop them, comic antics ensue, right? That is like the core fundamental structure of that. And so it's very Zenigata focused. Whereas this one, it's very much about, we have our 3 members of the Lupin gang, Lupin, Jigen, and Goemon. They're getting involved in some sort of heist. Fujiko is after the same thing. She's probably like, you know, in a relationship with some other thief or something like that is also pursuing whatever the thing is, and she is like backstabbing and manipulating and double-crossing everyone to try to get the thing that she wants. And Zenigata like happens to be there sometimes chasing after them. But yes, particularly in the first half of the show, at least in the episodes that we watched, right? We watched a selection of episodes, so it's hard to make a completely definitive statement. But of the ones we watched, in the first half, Zenigata was barely used. And then the second half, you got a couple more like, okay, this is like a Zenigata-focused episode. But if it was not an episode that had basically like Pops in the title of the episode, chances are he would kind of show up, have one kind of funny joke near the end, and that would be his role in the episode. Which is not a problem with Part 3. It's just like a structural difference, right? It's the same thing as like Part 2, I think sometimes, like, Zenigata was awesome, but sometimes you missed a little bit of Fujiko. Here, Fujiko is awesome, but sometimes you kind of miss having Zenigata, because you have a really nice, colorful main cast, but the cast is almost like one character too big for any show to, like, really fully utilize them completely.
Yeah. And you still have, obviously, Jigen and Goemon, I think, are, like, really locked in at this point. And Lupin can be whatever Lupin needs to be in every single episode. Yeah. And it still has that quality where even if Zenigata feels ancillary, Goro Naya is Goro Naya, and he will make you laugh with basically any line reading. And, of course, the whole cast. You know, at this point, we don't need to talk about the cast that much because they've been so solid for so long. But they are still, you know, one of the best casts in anime history, and this show still does the thing Part 2 did, where they are all in the main titles credited, which again is very unique in anime history. You know, next week, Sean, when we get to one of the movies we're going to watch is the Fuma Conspiracy, which is the one time they used an alternate voice cast, and it's because this cast got too expensive, and you can kind of understand why. This is kind of the rare thing in anime history where you have this solid 5-man team, and they're kind of a package deal. You can't just replace one of them unless, I mean, eventually Yasuo Yamada dies and they have to, but that is the show must go on kind of thing. And I can kind of understand how they became like too expensive because they're in the title sequence every week and you understand why. They're just dynamite together.
Yeah, and it's like every single voice and performance is so like iconic at this point, you know, because they're all, everything they're doing here is as good as it has ever been. Yeah, it's very impressive how like consistent that cast is. Because, you know, I mean, they've been particularly like Yasuo Yamada, who goes all the way back to the early 70s at this point. Like he's been voicing Lupin for like 14, 15 years by the time we get here. So it's like, that's a long time to be voicing one character, but he is not ever like phoning it in or anything. He's still giving a hell of a performance every episode. And
Kiyoshi Kobayashi all the way back to 1969 because he was in the pilot film.
Yeah.
So yeah, he did it forever, and that will be a ongoing theme.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
Anyway, you want to dive in and talk through, we did 20 episodes. One of them is, 2 of them were a two-parter, so we have 19 stories to talk about here, Sean.
Yes. So and one thing to note about this, just because I found this very funny, is that there are, so all the episode titles we have are translations from Japanese, right? Because as you said, this one never came out over here. And you have, at least on the list that you originally shared me, you had the ones, I think, from Wikipedia, which are like hilariously bad translations for all of the titles.
I replaced them in my notes.
The first one's not that bad. Okay, yeah.
I replaced them in my personal notes here, where I also have some of the credits, Sean, if you want to follow along there, with the ones from the Discotheque set that are professionally translated by professionals. But yes, it was hilarious how different they were sometimes. And I would look at the actual like kanji when they came up in the episode, I'm like, oh yeah, that Wikipedia translation is really off. So absolutely.
Yeah, because I copied my list that I was going off of for my notes when you originally shared it to me, and it was always funny. I would look at okay, what's the next episode? Okay, it's episode whatever, this is the title, and then I'd go to the Discotheque menu, I'm like, that's just a different title for an episode, so these have multiple titles. The first one actually is pretty fine. The Gold is Beckoning Lupin, I think, is still what is used on the Discotheque Blu-ray. But this, the first episode, this is where it takes us to where this is the San Francisco one where they go to Alcatraz at the end. And you just kind of, I think, immediately in the first episode get that sense that they're going for the part 1 style. It's much more sort of gritty. I think the San Francisco setting immediately like makes you think of stuff like Dirty Harry or Starsky and Hutch and that kind of like cop show sort of thing that immediately gets into. And it's all about chasing after this gold, and like the Chinese mob is involved, and there's a great character named Starmo who is the San Francisco outlaw. That is like the first of the, here's just a great side character just thrown into this episode with a great character design. And I don't remember much about the plot being that like incredible, but I just remember like what I kind of write in my notes is just how much fun it is to have it be a bit more of this kind of, you know, Jigen actually gets to do some cool action with his revolver, right? He like does like quick draw shit. He shoots like a hole through the hair of Starmo, and you get a bunch of more of that kind of like gunfighting action that sometimes you didn't have as much in part 2 all the time. There's a sense of like they're willing to have people get shot. They're willing to be a bit more violent. Fujiko is naked for like the entire second half of this episode for no particular reason. So they're willing to kind of go to that part 1 territory. They show that off pretty immediately in the first episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one, the story, not necessarily anything special, but it is a very fun production. And a lot of like heavy hitters here. Atsushi Yamatoya, who was the main writer on part 2 and Mamo and a lot of stuff, he did the script for this first one. Yuzo Aoki did the storyboards and directed it. So it is all kind of the heavy hitters here. And it's a fun one. I do, you start to see a lot of little things this show will be obsessed with. Like, first off, we start in San Francisco, and part 3 is a very urban show. It is globe-trotting, but it is globe-trotting to like major cities is the thing that part 3 really likes to do. The movie is all in Manhattan, for instance, and even though it is about the gold of Babylon, if you think that movie means we're going to be, there's a scene in the desert, mostly we're in New York. Part 3 is much more about different kind of big city centers, and that's where we get a lot of stories. There's a lot more mafia stories, which makes sense why this one is about Al Capone's treasure and all of that. But Al Capone, who apparently made 5 tiles while he was in Alcatraz and scattered the tiles, and those lead to his gold ingots, which isn't amazing. I didn't know Al Capone was so creative. I thought the syphilis maybe like got that out of him, but no, he did do all of that apparently.
Yeah, I did. As someone who has been to Alcatraz, I mean, maybe I don't know if in the mid '80s maybe it was abandoned or something, but it was very funny to see them just like walking around Alcatraz as this like totally abandoned, like dilapidated building that was falling apart. And it's like, I mean, no, Alcatraz is like this very well taken after museum and tourist trap in San Francisco. Again, maybe at the time I didn't look up what it was like in the mid 80s, but I just found it, as someone who has been there, I found it very funny. It would have been like, if only like the ending had happened, there was like a tourist guide in the background while the gunfight's happening. It's like, what the fuck's going on? Jesus Christ. It's like, this is just like, you know, the city of San Francisco owns this, and we read it as like, it's where we make a shit ton of our money. Come on, stop shooting this place up.
Yes. I love all of that. Another note is this is another motif we get a lot of in part 3. Part 2, Lupin used a lot of hot air balloons. Part 3, he has a lot of balloons of himself. He has a lot of inflatable Lupins. We get one of those here there's a big chase sequence. There's a very Scooby-Doo energy to the chases in this show, where Lupin uses a lot of weird traps and whatnot, including he just has a lot of balloons of himself this time. I think his balloon guy was like, hey, I'm moving on from hot air balloons. I'm making balloons of you. And Lupin said, sounds good to me, buddy. And my other note here is that Goemon's design looks real pretty, kind of looks like how Miyazaki prettied up Zenigata, and I think that's a good way to describe early Part 3 Goemon. He is a handsome motherfucker.
Yes, yeah, Goemon has like this huge glow up where he does look like he's played by like this incredibly handsome actor. He doesn't look like Goemon, he looks like a handsome actor playing Goemon, but it's kind of amazing.
And actually, this one, I actually really like some of the Goemon stuff. This episode ends with the gang swimming in the harbor to get the gold, and Goemon is sitting on top of the Golden Gate Bridge as the sun rises. That's one of my favorite shots in the series. It's so good. It's a really cool ending.
Yeah, and it has an interesting ending where it doesn't actually show you them getting the gold. It ends on that moment where you assume they're probably going to get it, but it doesn't actually show it to you. One thing that does pop up in episode 1 that I think this is a consistent issue with part 3 that is particularly notable when we get to the movie is that this does part 3 more so than part 1 or part 2 traffics in very like racially characterized depictions of both Chinese people and black people. It's something we saw, like it popped up once or twice in some of the early stuff where you have, you know, like Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball, I think is a pretty common reference point for in anime, that kind of characterized representation of black people. In this one, there's a Chinese character that is like the most stereotypical Chinese design, and it pops up a few times. But it is something to note. Like, this was like the first time and I had forgotten that it happens here, but I did make a note at the end. It's like, yeah, okay, that's a kind of racist depiction of Chinese character. And it's a note I had to make a couple of times as we watched part 3 stuff.
Yeah, it's stuff that I think if you watch anime of certain eras is not unfamiliar to you. This is not like unique to Lupin Part 3, but it is notable. And I think part of it is because this show is in urban spaces much more. It runs into black characters quite a bit more. It does a little bit more with Chinese characters in like a Chinese mafia kind of sense sometimes. And yeah, there's a way, and honestly, some of this survives in modern anime too, to be clear. Like, this has not
Yes.
all gone away. But like the way they draw lips for black characters, you know, it is notable. There is a particular episode where we'll talk about later called Manhattan Crisis that is mostly great, but starts with this just super racist depiction of black people in Harlem that reminded me a lot of like the James Bond movie Live and Let Die. And it is, you know, it's one of the things that is very 80s about this show. Both, and again, not just anime, but, you know, that James Bond movie wasn't that old either. So, you know, this was in the culture, sadly.
Yeah, but it pops up in this show more than it did the other Lupin ones so far.
Yeah. Episode 3 is the next one we watch, Greetings to Hell's Angel. This is a super bizarre episode that is kind of built out of pieces of other Part 2 stories. Like the Cinderella Stamp episode is kind of here because it's about a little girl who attaches herself to Lupin, but then it gets really dark because she dies at the end. It has a little bit of the Miami Bank episode from Part 2 where the bank is really excited to have Lupin stealing from them. And then it just gets very heavy in the final third or so because we learn this little girl has a fatal diagnosis and she has this request from Lupin to like sort of help her have fun. And then it has a really like heavy ending. It's quite the ride. And I kind of loved it for that.
Yeah, this is, like you said, Part 2, this is like tonally, this is a early Part 1 episode. Like, you could slot this in with any of those early Part 1 episodes, and it is doing the exact same tonal thing with, like, it's got a bunch of hijinks and, like, comic antics in it, but fundamentally, the core story is actually quite dramatic and very dark. It's got a lot of, like, sexual humor in it, which I think, like, it is towing a line with, I think Flora is the name of the character. It's towing the line with some of the sexual stuff it does with her, but I think it ultimately it handles it pretty well. Where Lupin is not, like, she's young, right? She's, like, supposed to be 14 years old or something. And Lupin never, like, goes over that boundary. In fact, there is one, I thought, actually quite funny meta joke that happens early in the episode once the sexual attraction happens, where Jigen and Lupin have a conversation. And Jigen says, Lupin, you should wear a sign that says adults only or like 18 plus. And then Lupin says, hey, man, you know that I've got fans of all ages, which I think is meant to be a commentary on the various, you know, hey, man, I'm both Mystery of Mamo and I'm Castle Cagliostro. Like, what can I fucking do? Like, it's just...
Right.
But it's playing with these kind of like meta jokes and sexual jokes and more adult humor that you didn't really see almost at all in Part 2, but is much more in line with the kind of humor you got in something like Mystery of Mamo.
Yeah, it's and I just made the Part 2 comparison because like literally the episode's plot is like there's bits and pieces that I recognize, but the combination, you're right, very much feels like an early Part 1, in part that it also like the ending is just, it's not funny, it's just like very dour. It is this little girl who dies. It gets heavy very fast because there's this moment where she collapses in Lupin's arms and says, I bet I'll get older soon in heaven because all I have to do there is wait for someone like you to show up. And like the end of the episode is Lupin and Jigen taking her body out of this like burning boat in this incredible set of images. And then they find that there are these like because the whole thing is that her like family has all these angel paintings, right? This big collection, and she has inherited them, and that's why everyone is after her, including Lupin at the beginning. But when her locket ceases to hear her heartbeat anymore, all these hellish paintings in her castle burn up. And then the angel paintings are hidden behind that, and Lupin buries her there amidst all the paintings with these flowers. And it's this tremendously beautiful ending that you would not expect out of the first half of the episode, but the movement there is actually quite compelling.
Yeah, it's very much in that kind of Part 1 tradition, where it reminded me of like the Pooh episode or something like that of part one has that same kind of plot structure, same kind of haunting ending. And I thought also it was funny because I watched this episode, I think the night we recorded the Castle Cagliostro podcast. That night I watched the first 2 episodes of part 3. And so this episode, right, the plot line is broadly similar to Cagliostro in the sense of it's about Lupin breaks into this place, he encounters this young girl, and he has to quote unquote like save her. But we talked about in the Cagliostro episode that like in that episode or in that movie, one of the things that Miyazaki does to make Lupin like very explicitly a hero character is that he is primarily focused on I'm going to save this girl, and like all the treasure and the forgery stuff and all of that is like in the background. Saving her is the priority. And this is the flip side of that, right? He wants the paintings, wants his heist, he wants the treasure, and the stuff that happens with Flora is a thing he gets thrown into the middle of in his attempt to do this very selfish heist. And over the course of his interactions with her, which he's constantly trying to find some way to avoid or put off dealing with her, he like kind of comes to care about and respect her. And I think that it's, for me personally, that's like the balance of how I prefer the Lupin character to be written. I think it's a more interesting characterization of like this line between him being out for like the fun of the heist, and that's what he's ultimately doing, but having underneath all that a heart of gold he discovers through his interactions with the supporting character of the episode. To me, that's like, this is a really great example of how that version of the character is written versus the more like Miyazaki hero version of the character. Not that like one is automatically better than the other, but this is like, for my personal preference, this is kind of how I like Lupin to be portrayed.
I think that's a good explanation, and it's very much the thing. Yeah, and the arc of this one is really good. I'd like to watch it again, just to kind of, knowing where it goes, kind of how it gets there. It's also just stunningly animated. This one has some amazing shots. This one was storyboarded by Aoki, and it is, I think, very virtuosic on that level. There's a lot of just like, again, the color work in this show is incredible, and there's a lot of like sunsets and like sky imagery in this one that is just beautiful. And I think this one showcases with the castle stuff, the kind of weirder, more experimental background art. I really love the look of this one. Yeah.
And then the Flora has like a really great character design as well. Like, it's just another good example of that character looks really distinctive. Like, I can remember her character design in my head, which is something I can't say about most one-off characters in a random Lupin episode. And it's like, I will almost wonder if they were like using real people or actors or something as a reference for drawing some of the supporting characters, because they have very distinctive appearances that I really like, because I think so many of the one-off characters in a Lupin episode just melt together. And I think it starts to happen in the second half of this show, but Flora looks completely different from any other girl that Lupin runs into in a random episode of Lupin III.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Episode 7, The Man Called Death Gerv. This is a good one, and a lot of heavy hitters. Yutaka Kaneko, who wrote a lot of the scripts, is the scenarist on this one. Shigetsugu Yoshida, who did all of our favorite like telecom episodes from part 2, including The Scattered Magnum. He did storyboards and direction. He also directs the movie for this, The Legend of Gold of Babylon. And then Shingo Araki is the animation director who did the Lupin VIII stuff. And this one is, on a production level, quite the episode, with a hell of a climax, but also a pretty fun story about this guy who has a bullet lodged in his optic nerve that makes him able to see the tears of time. Is that a good description?
Basically, yes. He can because he has the bullet in his brain, he is able to read where bullets are going to go, so he can dodge gunfire effectively. Yeah. This is another one that just feels straight up ripped out of part 1. It basically, in my notes I wrote, it's basically if you fuse the Pooh episode and the Magician episode of part 1 together, because Death Garv is basically a fusion of those two characters. This is also probably my favorite of the original badly translated titles, because this one in the original version you gave me was called The Man is Called the Death Garb, which I saw that and thought it was, oh, it's a death garb, like it's something someone wears when they die? Like, what is the death garb? But no, he's called Shinigami Gavu, which I would probably translate as like a Garv the Reaper. To me is a much clearer translation of that than Death Garv, but I think Death Garv is goofy in a really wonderful way.
Yes, Death Garv is like your kind of competent. It's fine. I do agree that Garv the Reaper would be better, but it's all good. And he is quite the Reaper. This is a violent ass episode. There's one shot where you have because this is like the Poon episode from part 1 you're talking about, where Fujiko has a backstory with this guy, and so this is an assassin that she knew, and this is how we get the connection here. But you get this shot of them in her flashback robbing a mob casino, and you have Garv using a Tommy gun and just Tommy gunning a dude to death, full on, in frame. They don't do a ton of blood, but you do see the body just torn apart by bullets, and you go, oh shit, that wouldn't have aired on NTV. Part 2 has some darker stuff, like, I guess it does have the torture episode with Goemon, but like, this is episode 7. They're doing that. There's a lot of like Lupin as a horn dog for Fujiko in this one. This one definitely is more of an adult anime you're reminded of in episodes like this. But you also just have... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you can continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the structure of this one, though, that I really love is once they get into conflict with Death Garv, you have basically a series of duels with all of the main characters. And so you get just... I think Shigetsugu Yoshida is just so fucking good at this, given like he's the guy who did the Scattered Magnum and whatnot. And so you have Jigen and Garv doing a duel under a bridge, waiting for a train to pass, and that's amazing. You have Goemon has a fight with him, and then the ending of the episode, which is Lupin and Jigen versus Garv, is killer, including a climax where Jigen shoots a bullet past Garv, and Lupin shoots Jigen's bullet to send it back at him to kill Garv, which is a stand-up and cheer, oh my god, what did I just see kind of ending.
Yeah, it's amazing, because also the ending is set up in a very Chekhov's gun-like fashion in a way that you don't see coming initially, which is like partway through the episode, they're all playing billiards, or it's like Jigen is playing billiards and Garv comes in, and it's about like him ricocheting the shot, and when... they see that Garv like gets almost hit by one of the bullets that bounced off a rock behind him, and you see a flash in Jigen's head of he thinks about that billiards game, and he's like, we've got it, and that's when they do the plan. It's such a great way of setting up that whole ending, and it is one of the most badass things they have done. It is just below Jigen running through and reassembling his revolver in that part 2 episode to shoot the guy. This of them bouncing a bullet off of another bullet to hit Garv from behind so he can't see the shot coming. Classic. It is fucking great.
Yeah. Couple of fashion choices here. You do get Lupin has a date with Fujiko at the beginning where he is in a white jacket with a red rose on his lapel. And I understand what you said earlier, Sean. I think a white jacket would be tough for a show. I do need a movie with Lupin in a white jacket because it looks fucking great. And then also you get a lot of him with the pink jacket off and just his undershirt, which drew my attention to the fact that his undershirt is green. And I actually really like that blend of colors because we already know Lupin looks very good in green. And I think you put the pink over that and everything. It's a great color design for him throughout this series.
Yeah. And then Garv himself is just an incredible character design where he's like this huge dude. He's got these aviators on. He's got this like receding 80s action movie villain hairline. Like he looks like he should be fighting fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger. He drapes his jacket on his shoulders. And then also in classic Lupin tradition of for no particular reason, characters are constantly using World War II era guns. He's clearly using a broom handled Mauser. So like a World War II era German pistol. And in proper Lupin tradition, is just so lovingly animated. It's like, they clearly took a lot of reference to draw his Mauser pistol because it is very, very clearly specific. You can absolutely tell what it is. It's just a great, it's basically like the Red 9 in Resident Evil 4. It's that kind of gun. And it is just... I love Death Garv's look so much. It is such a fucking great character design.
There's also a joke about Goemon spending a lot of time trying to find real tofu, and he gets it, and then Garv shoots it up into little pieces, and so they decide to make Mapo tofu with it because it's all crumbled, and that did make me laugh very hard, because there's actually a lot of good Goemon food jokes in this series, but we'll get to those later. All right.
Yeah, I need somebody to make the most obscure YouTube video ever, which is like to intercut that scene with like them making Mabo tofu with Kotomine Kire in Fate Stay Night and the big Mabo tofu scene there. Like, it is I need someone to make that, please, because it would be the stupidest fucking joke on the planet. But I want it.
I would watch an OVA about Goemon Ishikawa the 13th meeting our buddy Kotomine Kirei, and I think that would be very fun.
God.
Although I don't know who would come out on top in that one. I don't think it would end well for anyone.
It'd be great, though.
Yeah. Next episode, I think this is one of the more forgettable ones, to me at least. It's the Ruby Sheds Bloody Tears, episode 11. And I say forgettable even though this is a vampire episode. We have another one. This one actually includes... This is actually a Dracula episode, because they're looking for a gem called Dracula's Heart. And the main character in this episode that they're working with, this woman called Mama, is 300 years old, preserved by the power of the ruby, which sheds Dracula's blood on his birthday and gives a drop of it off that gives 100 years life once a year. And so this all is happening around this birthday when the ruby is going to shed bloody tears. I think there's some good stuff in this one. I had to go through my notes to try to remember what's kind of even in it, because I think it's one that feels a little slapdash as a story and not in a super cohesive way.
Yeah, I agree that it just doesn't it doesn't all come together, because it feels like it's it either wants to be a rival spy organization thing, which is the Mama character. I remember looking this up because that Mama character is so distinctive feeling, but then feels so inappropriately used in this Dracula story that when I looked it up, she's from the manga, in a totally unrelated storyline. Apparently they bring her back in one of the later Lupin things as well, because it's a really striking character design. But yes, they sort of attach this weird Dracula story to her that, as you say, kind of makes no sense at all. One thing I did, this has nothing to do with this episode in particular, but I did make a note on this episode on my notes where I said, one thing I appreciate about the show so far is that Jigen gets to blast motherfuckers every episode. In the other shows, you could go a while without Jigen pulling his revolver, but they build in a good Jigen fight in every single episode. And this is not true of the whole show, but every single episode we have talked about so far, there's always at least one moment where Jigen gets to pull his gun and blast someone. And it's I just remember watching Lupin III, and the whole setup with Jigen is he's this crack shot with his beloved revolver, but even in part 1 he barely ever uses it, and I just always felt it's weird that the dude's not getting in more Wild West style duels. And I like that part 3's commitment is no, Jigen has to shoot someone with his gun, and maybe he doesn't kill them, but he at least is going to shoot a hole in their hair or something like that every single episode.
Yeah. No, every one of these has at least good moments. This one also has a joke at the end that I love where, so Mama has all these servants, and Fujiko becomes one of them because she has the vampiric thrall thing that she can do. But when Lupin defeats her, none of the servants remember what happened, including Fujiko. So Fujiko doesn't know why Lupin had to destroy the ruby, and she gets really mad at him, and Lupin's trying to explain that he saved her life, and it's a very funny ending, because it's Fujiko, with the mask off, where she's just angry, and it's very good.
Yes. Yeah, but this definitely doesn't, I don't, again, maybe we'll have to rank the vampire episodes for Lupin III, but this one certainly is not as memorable as the Jesus one from part 2, so.
All right, next up is, I think, the episode that will take us the longest to talk about, and it is episode 13, Variations on Getting Carried Away, which was written by our boy Seijun Suzuki, darling of the Japanese New Wave himself, and then storyboarded and directed by Shigetsugu Yoshida, which is a heavy-hitting pair right there, and it is a heavy-hitting episode, because I don't even know if you could summarize what happens in this episode. It is, I think the way I would describe it is and I think that title about variations on getting carried away is a very good title. It plays like a game of Exquisite Corpse, which is the surrealist game where you draw a little bit of a drawing and then you fold it. People may have done this in class, when they were in high school or something, and you fold it up and have someone draw a little bit more, and then you pass it around and eventually you pull it apart and see what does it look like. And this kind of plays like that. It is a series of loosely connected scenarios that flow out of one another and get weirder and more anarchical as they go along. And I would call this an anti-narrative exercise. It is an episode that is specifically challenging the entire idea of having a narrative, because it just is so free-flowing stream of consciousness. and it is pure uncut Suzuki on that level, and then brought to life by Shigetsugu Yoshida, one of the very best Lupin directors. Honestly, with everything I've seen, he should be talked about in the same vein as like Miyazaki on Lupin. His stuff is incredible, and I think this episode is pure, full-on avant-garde episode of television, and I think it is a kind of a masterpiece on that level.
Yeah, for me, this is like the standout best episode of part 3. Like, I wish part 3 had, like, maybe not necessarily something as insane as this. I don't know how often you can do something like this, but more episodes that were like this, which we had several in part 2 that were like these massive mountains where it's like this huge peak of quality where everything else is still good, but this one episode is so standout. And we had, a bunch of those, particularly near the end of the episodes we covered in part 2. They're just like, like the Cold War episode with Jigen, where you're like, oh my God, this is an incredible episode. That's so just kind of like a masterpiece. And this is that to me. And I think the thing to start about with this episode is talking about the title, because the title 100% is an instruction on how you're supposed to understand the story, but it's also one that you can't really fully translate into English. Let's start with the worst version of the title, which is the original one you pulled from Wikipedia, which is called Play a Joke on the Variation, which tells you nothing. Like, is a terrible title. It makes no sense. It has no connection to what the episode is doing. Variations on Getting Carried Away, which is the discotheque one, that is a very serviceable, good translation of the title. But the full title in Japanese is called Warunori no Henso Kyoku, and there's a pun in the title. So Warunori means like basically the getting carried away. Like it's like noru means to ride, waru is like bad. So it's like getting carried away, like playing like a prank or something. Things getting out of hand kind of thing. And then Henso Kyoku is interesting here because there's a pun going on the title. Henso Kyoku, as a word with like the most common kanji that you would use to write that word, means a variation in musical terms. It's kind of like what you're talking about earlier with Yuji Ono in jazz, because variations are very common in jazz, right? Where you are doing a similar like melody in a similar like part of the music. So it's like, okay, go back to these 8 bars, but you're putting a slight variation on it. We've changed the tempo, we've changed the key, we've changed this element of the melody, we've like introduced this instrument, whatever, right? And like jazz standards are built on these kinds of variations where you're putting your own spin and adding in improvisational or unique elements as you're going through similar sections of the music. So that's what a Henso Kyoku is. That's what they mean by variation in the title. But they have written the kanji Henso here with the kanji for Henso, which means disguise. So it is like doing a pun where it is a disguise. So that I think it is both the episode itself is a disguise, that it is not a normal Lupin episode. It is something else. It is dreamlike, or it is like non-narrative. It doesn't follow narrative logic, so it has kind of disguised itself. It is not what you think at first, as well as it being like about disguises, right? And like people in Lupin are always in disguises. They're not who they seem. The quote unquote antagonist of the episode, the lady, it has been disguised the whole time, right? Like who you thought was Fujiko was not Fujiko. Like if you can draw a plot in the episode, that is the clearest plot thing there is. There's who you thought was Fujiko near the beginning of the episode, and then you have all go on this whole crazy fucking series of events, and then at the end you have him confronting that woman who is like, oh, that's who we thought was Fujiko, and then at the end you have the actual Fujiko doing the scene that fake Fujiko did at the beginning. So there's like a disguise motif specific to the plot as well. But to me, like that weird title is this instruction on you to like look at, this is not a narrative storyline, really. It is this repetition of similar sort of events that start to spiral out of control. And the more it goes on, like the more strange and bizarre and abstract and avant-garde it becomes as you're playing this variation on the mischief of this episode. It is a great title. It is also a title that cannot be translated, right? So variations on Getting Carried Away is good, but there's no way to get the pun element in there as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you gave us that full explanation, because it is really important, and it's just an amazing episode. I don't even know, should we try to walk through the plot, or is that kind of a useless exercise? Because it's like as soon as you try to put this into words, it starts to fall apart a little bit, like in your hands. It's like holding water in your hands or something, you know?
Well, I mean, because it's not really a plot. It's like it's a series of like
Right,
set
right.
pieces, basically, right? So I think we can kind of talk about the set pieces because let's see, because let's let you start, John, because you have more in-depth notes than I do on this one.
I have like 2 full pages on this. It was just like I had to write so much down because it starts out basically like a Roadrunner cartoon or something, where it is this very like simple, fractious animation of Zenigata chasing with Lupin in this very sort of nondescript field. It kind of feels like when you would come into the middle of a Looney Tunes cartoon or something. And he's got his super Lupin catching fly paper is his like new device. Zenigata has multiple inventions in this. But anyway, Lupin gets away, but is very exhausted. And so for like the first half of this episode, and this is actually for a lot of the episode, Lupin is kind of like lethargic because like something has happened and he doesn't have his full normal energy. So Fujiko comes by the hideout where Jigen and Goemon are hanging out with Lupin, and Fujiko is trying to flash him and like get him to help her and like get him to react, but he won't do it. And he's exhausted out of his mind. He's got this big bald patch from where the fly paper like got him and all of this. And Fujiko winds up like basically stealing him away and trying to get him to come with her to help rob rich ladies at the estate of Madame Louisa. So already this is weird, but it's like the shape of a normal Lupin episode, but it already looks off. And that's kind of what you were talking about, is that it's a scenario that we're starting with is a little normal, and then it starts going through these variations. Because when you get to the castle, it's not a castle. It's actually a rocket ship that flies off like a space shuttle and puts everyone into 0G. And then we learn there is the XX Republic and the ZZ Republic who are at war down on Earth. And all the ladies are watching and commenting on which countries made which parts of the missiles, because it turns out Madame Louisa is actually an arms dealer, and they're spectating the war that they're financing. But then the Black Roman warrior group hijacks the shuttle, so Lupin has to collect everyone's jewels as ransom payment. And then it turns out Fujiko is with the army and is betraying Lupin. And this is kind of the series of events it's going through, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's very weird. Lupin does get arrested. Zenigata is building a very fancy machine to capture Lupin. Put a pin in that. That is the kind of key point at the end of the episode, tied to that disguise idea. Then it goes into one of the most amazing jokes in this whole series, which is that, so Madame Louisa has a bunch of hostages, and Lupin is one of the hostages. They have enough money to pay the ransom for 150 of the hostages, but not Lupin, who is the 151st, which leads to the amazing image of Zenigata out in the middle of the street, sitting under a banner reading "The Association to Rescue the Phantom Thief Lupin" with a donation box, and he's like busking for it, which is maybe the best use of Zenigata in this entire series. Part 3.
It is the best joke in Lupin III so far, because because of the nature of this episode, it goes on completely, it doesn't comment on that at all. It's like this brief image you're given, and then it moves on, and then later, he has like pocket change basically that he's trying to barter like Lupin for. He's got like, here's like some coins I've got in my pocket, because obviously nobody's donating money to try to save Lupin. But yeah, it just moves past this image so quickly. But it is so fucking funny because it is the most like Zenigata thing ever, is him out there trying to raise money to try to save Lupin so that he can arrest Lupin.
Yes, because he then is negotiating with Fujiko, who is working for the army, and he has $15 million for the 150 hostages, but he only has, as you say, like $10 in pocket change for Lupin. So Fujiko says they will execute him. It then cuts to Lupin being crucified on the cross, and that is where we cut to the Eyecatch. We're only halfway through, people. And the second half of the episode starts with Fujiko announcing to all of the hostage ladies, now freed, that they can stick Lupin with a spear or they can shoot him with a gun, saying this is a game that they played in ancient Rome, and asks who will throw the first spear at the man. And then as they go and start to spear him, a bunch of birds fly in a pretty clear homage to Alfred Hitchcock, and start attacking everybody, which is, and this is the other thing I have to say that it is not coming across just trying to describe what's happening, is that visually, like, you can't just call this the Seijun Suzuki episode. Shigetsugu Yoshida is so game for what this, like, episode is trying to do, and I think how it is boarded, how it is animated, it does so many cool things, including in this sequence, it depicts the bird attack through this series of still images, which is like a common, like, older anime thing, but it specifically looks like how, like, Toei movies did it in the 60s, like Horus, Prince of the Sun, or one of those, or like, you know, Flying Phantom Ship does scenes like this. And it's really, like, lovely, but also striking because there's all this crucifixion imagery. Zenigata full-on picks up Lupin's cross and is running away with the cross before tripping, dropping it off a cliff, and sending Lupin careening into the river. Goemon then arrives, just out of absolutely nowhere, he hasn't been in the episode so far, arrives just as Lupin is about to go over the falls, and we get this big dramatic still of him cutting the bindings on the cross, and then Lupin goes over the fall on the cross, screaming, and this is the point where I had to pause the episode and go, when did The Mission come out? The movie The Mission, directed by Roland Jaffe, which has one of the most famous movie posters of all time, because the movie poster of The Mission is someone on a cross being sent over a waterfall upside down. That was 2 years after this. This is not an homage to The Mission. This is a pure fucking coincidence that it looks identical to the poster of The Mission, but with Lupin in his pink jacket. I can't believe the words that are coming out of my mouth, Sean.
Yeah, I had to do the exact same thing because I was like, this is not possible. But it's like, but obviously also it's not that The Mission didn't copy this because this wasn't even out over here. So it's just, as you say, it is just purely, you know, two separate tracks, both developing an image of a man tied to a cross getting thrown off of a waterfall 2 years apart from each other. But, you know, it's a very striking image. So it works really well.
Lupin gets a rope, or he uses the rope that he was tied with and kind of swings to safety. He goes into a cave. More birds attack him. You get a big pan right to left of this. It's a big still, like, mural kind of image, but it's of Lupin fighting a bunch of different birds, but it's a bunch of stills in the same place. It's hard to describe, but it's a really stunning panning shot. And then Lupin utterly destroys the bird and eats its flesh in one of the more disturbing images of the episode. This is where I wrote, what the fuck, in my notes.
Yeah, I think this is the moment where you enter the most, like, extreme phase here now, where you're so, like, everything up to this point has been insane, because, like, it's insane on the face of it, but it's also insane in how it's presented, right? Because you could make an episode of Lupin III that has a castle that turns into a rocket ship. It would be fucking crazy in any other episode of Lupin, but you could, if you made it, that's what the episode was. We've had weirder shit. We've had Jesus vampires and all that kind of shit going on. So it's like, you can do spaceship castle. But it's presented in such a sort of dreamlike, bizarre fashion where you can't tell, is this literally happening? Is he imagining that this is happening? Like, is Lupin been drugged? Like, you can't, if you're trying to read it literally and trying to, like, sort of understand it in a linear plot fashion the way you would other Lupin episodes, it doesn't connect in any clear, tangible way to what comes before it. Then same thing with the crucifixion and this weird war that's happening in this sort of nondescript South American country, maybe, like just sort of a country with a jungle. And again, that is something we have seen, that kind of like Civil War plotline in some other Lupin episodes, but it's so disconnected from everything else. And it suddenly getting thrown into Fujiko trying to crucify Lupin and like stab him with a spear like they're fucking Longinus in the crucifixion of Jesus is very weird. But then now you get to Lupin is in a cave and he's kills and eats a bird raw. That is something you would never see in any context in any other episode of Lupin. It would never, ever happen. It is so far outside the world of Lupin III as you understand it. It is such a like primal image that this is where to me it like enters like, oh, you are just out of it. Like it is gone. The variations have cycled to the point where you are no longer in the world of Lupin III anymore. You're not like playing with those concepts in like motifs that you can see in other Lupin episodes. We are in like a different space entirely.
And it only gets weirder from here. We're not done. Because then Lupin goes back to the castle. I guess he just landed, so, like, the spatial geography is completely, like, abstract, right? And so we're back at the castle where we started. And an assemblage of movie characters, including Superman and the whole Lupin gang, are assembled. And it's basically like wax figures of all of them. Lupin takes a Zenigata disguise, and then he takes a knife from the bust of Joan of Arc. And then he enters this very strange liminal space that I also think is very inspired by production design in Seijun Suzuki's movies, but like in a way where you could only do it in animation, because it is this long series of pillars in this endless blue hallway. And then there is this carpet in the middle of it that has a bunch of doors on it, but it's just doors that open onto more carpet. And there's no wall around it, right? It's just freestanding doors. And he goes through all of this, again, as Zenigata, finally reaches a wall with a door, enters a big hallway, and he finds Fujiko, now with an eye patch and tattered clothes, waiting for her reward for the space trip job. Lupin says he's come for his 30%. Fujiko figures out who he is, and Lupin figures out this must not be Fujiko. He says, if you want the jewels, you'd better look for the crows. They've eaten them all. And if you want the ransom money, ask the wind. It's carried off all the money. I love that line. That's such a weirdly poetic line to just be dropped in the middle of all this. And then, of course, we realize Fujiko is actually Madame Louisa. And she dares Lupin to kill her, to kill the richest lady in the world. She points a gun, and he throws the Joan of Arc knife, which slashes her wrist. She kicks the gun back over to him and tells him to shoot her. She selected him as her executioner and says she doesn't want to live on with this ugly face. And then she pulls off the Fujiko mask, and we see the empty eye socket that was ripped out by the birds. In a very disturbing image, even for, again, this show is more violent than part 2. Not this violent. And Lupin is, and again, Lupin is Zenigata throughout all of this. I want to make clear, he is in the Zenigata disguise, but you know it's Lupin. We know. But anyway, he feels he can't shoot her. It's impossible for him to do it. He goes back into the endless blue hallway, and we hear a gunshot from behind. And so there's this two-part line. He says, before he leaves, it's impossible for me to shoot you. And after you hear the gunshot out in the hallway, he finishes, he says, after all, I'm just a worm, which is this thing he had called her earlier. And then he goes outside, and a crow comes down, and its eyes glow red. But we're not done yet, because you have a final scene where Lupin is walking through the desert and winds up at a checkpoint where he meets the real Zenigata, who has set up the machine he was building earlier, which is a disguise detector. It'll show the real Lupin. But Lupin runs through just as the crow flies by, which makes it look like it's a person with a crow head. And they have this crazy exchange where Lupin, as Zenigata, gets the real Zenigata to go in the box and then locks him in, leaving Zenigata exposed for the audience. And Lupin spikes the camera to tell everyone to step up and watch. He thinks about what it would be like if he could get Fujiko in there. And then you see Fujiko, the real Fujiko, who had no part in any of this. She returns to where Jigen and Goemon are hanging out from the beginning of the episode, and it's basically just she went out to the store and came back, and she just hasn't been involved in any of this. Then you cut back to Lupin and Zenigata, who is still stuck in the machine. The crow lands on top of the machine. Lupin's eyes burn red, and we fade to black, and we go into the next episode preview.
Yep. And I wrote in my notes, wow, 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 wow. And I think that is a good reaction to the episode. Yeah, it is such a surreal, dreamlike experience as you're just sort of slowly spinning out of control. And it is that, I think one of the things I love about it in terms of how it sets itself up, the weird lethargy of Lupin at the very beginning sets you into this that's such a weird tonal space, because Lupin's acting so out of character where he just doesn't want to do anything, and he has to be basically dragged away by Fujiko until he crawls after her. It's such a strange way to enter the story where you feel like you're being woken up from a stupor like Lupin is, and it creates that dreamlike atmosphere where nothing quite is hooks together, nothing quite connects, and then you have these series of events that feel like they're almost like variations or motifs on like things you see in Lupin, like these crazy heists and the like insanity of like the castle and the as a rocket ship, and then these sort of more kind of gritty violent stuff with the Civil War, and then this just, you are totally in some sort of like subconscious space for the entire ending where everybody is everything is some sort of weird disguise. You're in a space that you do not understand in any way, shape, or form. It does not make any literal physical sense, either how you have even ended up in the castle, which should be in space, or how, like, you know, you're moving through these hallways that are empty hallways with no walls that open up into a black void or blue void, and there are infinite doors opening unto infinite doors. It is such a like literal trip, basically, as you're sort of just getting into this episode. And it's just an episode that operates so much on vibes in the subconscious, in the way that Seijun Suzuki's movies do, right? It is one that I didn't look up ahead of time that this was the one that he wrote, but I knew that one of them was the one he wrote. And I was like, at the end of it, I'm like, this is the one that Seijun Suzuki wrote, right? And then I looked it up and said, yeah, yep, you do not need to be told that, because it is playing in this very anti-plot, non-narrative, dreamlike fashion that is rad as shit. I don't know, like this, I was so into what this episode did.
Well, it's like, you know, I've read a fair bit of Seijun Suzuki criticism as part of my studies in like Japanese film history. And maybe there's like a good monograph that does this that I have not seen, and that's entirely possible. I've not seen any major like writings on Seijun Suzuki that grapple with his Lupin work, which seems insane to me when you look at like the body of it and how much he was involved and how much his work influenced it. Like, you only are going to ignore that if you just never look at animation, which is a dumb thing to do if you're studying Japanese film. Just, it's a volume thing. You should kind of know animation if you're going to study Japanese film. And like, I would say this is every bit as essential to the canon of Seijun Suzuki as Branded to Kill or Tokyo Drifter.
Yeah.
Because it's a similar project. Like, what the Seijun Suzuki thing was, is he was a studio guy in an era when it was very much kind of like Hollywood in the classical era, where it was kind of an assembly line. You worked for the studio. You didn't work, you know, privately and get hired for jobs. You know, he worked for Nikatsu, and they assigned him scripts. And they were very formulaic because Nikatsu kind of had its own sort of kind of movie that it made, and he had the kind of movie he was assigned to, and he eventually got tired of it, and he started taking those scripts and twisting them and making them weirder, and the movies became, and this is what is so fascinating about them, because there aren't a lot of studio directors who are ever this implicated in an avant-garde project, but he was implicated in this project of like fighting narrative and fighting genre and taking like these studio B picture assignments and twisting them, and like the movies are rebelling against themselves. And that's what this episode is doing. It is taking, like, you know, what's more formulaic than a show in its third incarnation that has had hundreds of episodes, right? And it is taking that and like twisting it, and it's an episode that is like rebelling against the constraints of what you think Lupin is, just as Tokyo Drifter was rebelling against a 60s Yakuza movie. And it's a really fascinating and also invigorating thing to watch. It is more analogous to a piece of jazz than it is to a narrative piece of filmmaking or TV. And that does just make it so cool and unique. And I absolutely, if we're making the top 10 list of Lupin episodes, this is on there. This is one of the best. This is one of the, like, I think most interesting episodes of anime I've ever seen. It should absolutely be written about with that other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something. And again, this isn't like I don't have, and I don't have this, and I don't think this is like what you should do with this kind of episode. But I don't have the like, the break down every single thing, and here's like what everything represents in like sort of ascribed meaning to all the different pieces of the episode. Because I just think it's like so not what this style of story is asking for. But there's something to me just so I found very viscerally powerful about like the recurring motif of the crow. There's just something so striking about it in this because it's so not Lupin. You know, it's just there's nothing about the Lupin franchise or the Lupin stories or anything like that I think this like imagery of the crow that I think is so like associated here with this kind of sense of mortality. As an English major person, obviously a raven is not a crow, but it makes me think of the like Edgar Allan Poe's Raven, right? There's like these black birds that you associate with like death, and that just being this thing that sort of hovers through this episode, and then kind of becomes more intensely involved, and then Lupin consuming the crow, Lupin seemingly like symbolically becoming the crow when he moves through the disguise machine, and then at the end when he is like become one with it through like this weird synthesis with their eyes both glowing. I don't know, it's just very kind of nightmarish, but in this subtle way. It's not in your face about it. It's not sort of like violently shocking, but it just kind of got under my skin the way that it's using that imagery. And like I thought about the last couple of shots of this episode a lot after I watched it, him looking up and then his eyes glowing red. And then the episode just ending and then it going into a next on preview as if it was a normal episode of Lupin III. And in many ways that the kind of that paratextual element of that the normal packaging around an episode of Lupin that occurs at the end of it, like, is almost the thing that like makes the whole episode. The fact that it like has to jarringly return to some sort of like very default normal. If this was a modern episode of anime, it would never be like this in the first place. But you would have done a special thing of where you don't play the credits, or you play the credits over black, or it happens over sections of the ending of the episode or something. But you would not just do, here's a next on episode preview, here's our ending theme song. You would never ever do that if you made a special production episode like this, that this obviously is a modern anime. But I think that would almost miss the point, because it needs to be sort of like, the insanity of this episode needs to be contained within the box of a totally normal, everyday episode of Lupin III. That sexy adventure plays at the beginning, the ending theme plays at the end, and it's like, it's just another episode. What's so weird about this one?
I agree completely. In the same way that, like, you know, Branded to Kill would be a less interesting movie in film history if it was this weird indie project that played at a couple of art house theaters. It was made by Nikatsu and played in Nikatsu theaters, and they were so mad they fired and blacklisted him, right? And that's, you know, and I think it's the same kind of thing here. It is, I agree, like, I do think the jump into the next episode preview paratextually kind of ties the episode. It's the final tying of the bow that this episode is. I agree completely. Now for something completely different. Episode 18, also one of my favorites, but very different. Showtime Reeks of Death, which is the most 80s episode of Lupin III Part 3, because it is the Flashdance episode. Almost literally, because it has shots that are taken from the famous 80s movies Flashdance. But it is about Lupin doing a job with a waitress at this club who is trying to become a dancer, and her name is Jenny. And he becomes her partner in this goal to, I think they're getting revenge for her, like, dead dad or something. Something like that. That's a plot that is in a lot of Lupin episodes, so I might be misremembering that. But the basics is that you have an incredible style to this episode, so much cool mise-en-scène, but all through the sort of weird pop abstraction language of Part 3. You have amazing character animation, and you have all this dance that is really cool. The key song that she dances to several times, including at the climax, is a song called Darkest Eyes by Kathy Lynn. It's not original to the show, but it was actually only a month old when they made the episode, so it was incorporated very quickly. And overall, it's just an interesting episode in that it's a big heist caper with a cool guest star character. It's a characterization of Lupin that is both sexual and anarchic, but also heroic and chivalric in that specific register. And then this incredible sense of style and sort of synesthesia with the way it uses dance and everything. I think this is also, to me, kind of a defining Part 3 episode.
Yeah, this is the 80s episode. This is like the one that, like, I think offers, this is what Lupin in the 80s using that like aesthetic style can do. This is also the one that, like, a couple of minutes into the episode, I had like this powerful sensation of, which I kind of talked about a little bit with Lupin III Part 1. With Part 1, I compared it to the show Dirty Pair, which is a great anime that maybe we'll one day find a space to cover on Japanimation Station. But Dirty Pair, to recap what I said with the Part 1, why it reminded me of Lupin, or vice versa, is that it is also this sort of like wacky cartoon hijinks show, but is specifically made for an adult audience that will have like darker, more dramatic plots underneath the wacky cartoon hijinks. It's like very sexual. It can be very violent. That's like such a unique mixture. But then this episode was like, oh my God, this is super fucking Dirty Pair. Just because it is that, all the sexual and violence and like the cartoon hijinks, like all that is there, but it also has all the 80s vibe because Dirty Pair is an 80s anime. It is the most 80s anime ever. And then also Jenny in this episode is played by the actress Shimazu Saiko, who we would know also as 4 from Zeta Gundam, but Shimazu Saiko is Yuri, one of the 2 pair in Dirty Pair. She also is she's one of the cop babes in the movie that we watched. I forget which one she plays, but she plays one of the cop babes as well. But she's got just like a very distinctive voice, and she's very much doing the same kind of voice as Yuri because the Jenny character is pretty similar to her from Dirty Pair, and that they're like both like kind of young and they're very kind of free and very kind of like free with their sexuality and that kind of stuff. And she goes to a similar register. And so this just like made me go on a whole weird Dirty Pair trip with this episode. But yeah, it's fucking great. The animation is phenomenal. The use of the dancing throughout, where you have your big dancing climax that happens where they're dancing to dodge gunfire to that song Darkest Eyes, which is one of my favorite genres of weird old Japanese music, where Kathy Lin is an artist that seemingly only ever put out music in Japan, but she's obviously, I think she's like Irish. And I just love that. We got that with some Gundam stuff, you know, like with Warren Weeby. Where you just have these like really interesting musical artists that have these careers that are Western artists, but their careers just like took off in Japan. That's like the only place they put out meaningful quantities of music.
The woman who does the end theme is also that. It's a woman named Sonia Rose, who was, I think, a Brazilian bossa nova singer who came to Japan when she was pretty young and never left, and mostly retired, but did work with Yuji Ono on this and some other future Lupin, and he has a jazz album with her as well that I've listened to that's really good. And it's the same idea. So yeah, they attracted this kind of person, absolutely.
Yeah, because Darkest Eyes, it's like this really great 80s pop song that like, you know, it's a really good song in its own right. It fits the ending, like big climax phenomenally. And then this episode also has just like a fantastic ending where Lupin drives Jenny to the school or whatever it is that she's going to go apply to. And she thinks like, like she wants to have this like long relationship with Lupin, and she gets out of the car and says like, you'll be waiting for me when I get back, right? And Lupin goes like, yeah, of course, it's like you and me together. Then she goes into the school and he says bye Jenny, and he drives away. And that's like, it's to me, it's like what I said earlier with the other episode 3, where it's like, this is like the absolute sweet spot for me with the Lupin character, of where he is selfish. He is like out for himself in so many ways. He's not in this relationship with Jenny because he's like magnanimous about it. He is very much using her both like sexually. This is one of the most like sexually frank episodes. Like it strongly implies that these two people are having sex. In the scene where Jigen is driving the car and he like turns the rear view mirror because he doesn't want to watch, which is a really good scene. But it's like, it's clear that they're in a sexual relationship. But also Lupin is using her because she works at the casino and she can help him do the heist that she wants to do as well. But like, you know, so he's doing this for selfish reasons. He's getting stuff out of this relationship, but you do get the sense that he does really come to care about her, but he's never going to be with her. He's going to have to go back to his anarchic life. And I think there's something interesting about this kind of story not ending with the girl dying or her being like taken away by something else that's like, oh, I have to go back to the life I had, which is the way that this usually plays out. That's like the Cagliostro thing, where it's like, Lupin can't be a part of your life, so you go back to the life you had. There's something so powerfully melancholy about like, she's not dead, she's alive, but she's also trying to move forward in life, but moving forward doesn't mean she's with Lupin, but she's not going back to the life that she had. And there's just like a very sweet, bittersweet quality to the ending because of that. That's a tone that I think fits Lupin very well, but I don't think any episode we've watched like quite hits that tone the way that this episode does.
I agree. I think all of that is very true, very special. I misstated the plot of this episode earlier, which I deeply apologize for, because I actually really like what it does here. It's not any other motivation other than she wants to become a big dancer, and she is friendly with Lupin, and they're having sex, and he reveals this plot he has at the casino, and she's going to help him with that if he helps her with her like dancing career. And so it is just this thing that they're kind of exchanging, and it's not anything bigger like anyone trying to get revenge or anything, and which is a common motivation for Lupin plots like this. And instead it's much simpler, and I like that about it. And they make a great pair. They have real chemistry. Like this, there's a real spark between the characters, and then you do get that ending. And the one detail you didn't say, Sean, is he also leaves the rose on the ground before he leaves. It's bye-bye, right. Jenny, and he leaves this rose. And so it's romantic, it's sad, it's because it's kind of an interesting version of the same thing I think Miyazaki is doing at the end of Cagliostro, but this is more in the kind of like classical bastard version of Lupin, which is him recognizing that she is going to become a like better, fuller person and move on in her life, and he's never going to do that. He's never going to be, he's Peter Pan. He's the boy who never grew up. It's just if Peter Pan were into sex and money, right? Like he is never going to grow up from this, so he has to let go of Jenny at this point, which on one level is magnanimous and good of him not to drag her down with him, but is also this sad kind of statement about like, no, Lupin's never living a different life. We saw the inside of his head in The Mystery of Mamo, and it's just boobs and Zenigata, you know? He's not going to try to become someone better.
Yeah, absolutely. And this episode, you know, it is, like I've said with a couple of them, this shows part 3's tendency to have these like really memorable, striking supporting characters. This is probably like the best of that, where it's I think like Jenny is such a striking character. Has a very distinct, memorable design. And then the performance, and this is true actually of like a lot of the other one-off characters have all been voiced by like pretty notable voice actors in a way that is not particularly true of a lot of like part 1, part 2 characters. But like Dirty Pair was airing basically at the same time, right? Like Saiko Shimazu had already played 4. Like she was like a fairly in-demand voice actress at this point. So like, and this is true of a lot of the other voice actors. I think Death Garv was voiced by the guy who voiced like Demon King Piccolo in Dragon Ball. You know, you're getting like pretty notable voice actors playing your supporting characters that are also getting these like very detailed, unique character designs that look like they could be the main characters of the show. You're not getting the thing in some of this when you look at Jenny, where in other episodes of Lupin, you look at the one-off character, and you don't need to be... If you had never seen an episode of Lupin III, and you saw the characters in the episode lined up, you would never need to be told which of these are the main characters, which of these are the one-offs, because the one-offs look so one-off. They look like, oh, we didn't put that amount of detail in. They're not that unique. They look like people that just come in. You know, it's like an NPC in a video game standing next to the main character of the video game. The models are clearly have a lot of different amount of love put into them, but you think you can feel how much thought and care went into designing and writing and portraying the character of Jenny, even if she's in only one episode. And it really makes episodes like episode 18 stand out a lot to me in the Lupin canon, because most of the Lupin episodes, even ones that are really great, they don't give the side characters that much like detail as you get here.
And to be clear, it's because there's a practical reality to drawing characters for a weekly anime, right? As same with NPCs in a video game. You just can't make every character look great, but it is something, you're right. I think this is, Yuzo Aoki clearly, I think, had this as a focus in part 3. And this is another one he storyboarded and directed, and you can fucking tell. I also just, that climax with the dance routine and the way it is using light, because it starts with this strobe effect of solid lights layered over the characters, and then it becomes more fully colored. But like the choreography and the fluidity of the character animation and everything that's going on is truly out of this world. This is a great episode.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Episode 23, Operation Beirut Mobile Bank Robbery. This is one that I don't think is, like, great, but I do like the premise a lot, which is about this bank in a war zone that every OPEC member has cash in, but the bank is safe because it's a giant tank that can move through the streets when chaos starts. And so when a war starts, the bank just gets up and moves. And so Lupin, he wants to prove that he can open the virgin safe that no man can touch. It's just for the challenge. I don't think the episode fully lives up to how great that premise is, but it does have some some good things in it, and there is a joke at the end that I absolutely love that I'll talk about in a second here. This one feels basically very part 2-ish, kind of, I feel like, more than it feels like distinctly part 3, like the last couple episodes we talked about, but I do love that basic premise.
Yeah, it feels like a very standard episode of Lupin. Yeah, it's got a cool premise with the big mobile bank that is probably not used as much as you really want it to be used, but it is fun. Lupin does have a line in this early on that I wrote down because I thought this is such a good scumbag line that Lupin has, where he says, looks matter for women. For banks, it's the inside that counts. And that is such a fucking piece of shit thing to say, but it's such a Lupin line where it's not how the vault looks, man. It's the inside that counts. It's not like a woman. It's like, okay, yeah. Lupin.
I started using that line on women last week, Sean, and it's not working for me.
Yeah, weird.
I'm kidding. I also love the joke at the end, which is there's this whole convoluted plot where they wind up having to burn all the money to get the vault to open to let them out and live.
Right.
And so Fujiko is mad because she says it wasn't worth the trouble because they didn't get away with much money. And Lupin says, oh, it'll be worth it because I made that deposit. I'll just come back for the interest in a few years. And then he lights a cigarette with the bill they have. And I love that ending. I think it's a great joke of Lupin being, but I deposited the money in this bank is great interest rates. We're good. I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good, even in like a sort of middling episode or like average episode like this, their characterization for Fujiko and Lupin is so strong of where like Lupin is so in it just for the fun of the adventure, whereas like Fujiko is actually like very greedy, right? She wants these things. I don't think that she has any reason to want them. I don't think she has anything she wants to do with them, but she actually wants to like possess this stuff. And that's her primary interest. Whereas Lupin just wants to have the fun of the heist. And it's the thing that like makes their characters contrast so well and makes Fujiko a fun villain, because like Lupin never gets that mad at her when she does what she does, because in many ways it just makes the heist more fun for Lupin to do. So yeah, even like this episode I think is like fine. It's very standard. The show does have such a good, strong characterization for those two that it does make that ending land really well.
Yeah. This next episode, episode 24, Sleep Peacefully, Friend. I think this is an interesting one because it almost is great. It's a Goemon episode, kind of. And I think this one, it has the ending episode is this scene where Goemon in the rain kills these guys who betrayed his friend. And it's one of the best scenes in part 3. And I think what's disappointing about this episode is that it comes so close to being the Goemon version of the Scattered Magnum from part 2. And I think the mistake it makes, and it's the thing that the Scattered Magnum does so well, is that there is a Lupin heist going on in the background of it. All of the stuff with Jigen dueling this guy is there is this heist that they are on, but we are from Jigen's POV, and he is more preoccupied with the duel. So we see bits and pieces of the heist, but it is mainly about Jigen dealing with this guy who used to be his friend, and they've had a falling out, and now they're going to duel, and then we get this virtuoso ending. This episode absolutely has the virtuoso ending, no doubt about that. The problem is that I think it focuses way too much on the heist, which is not that interesting of a heist, and Goemon is very backgrounded for a lot of it. And I think if they did the Scattered Magnum thing and had it be about Goemon and his friend, the Blue Dragon character, and there's some really great scenes with them throughout, but I think they have Lupin too front and center, and I think that is the thing that makes this a little disappointing to me, because the pieces are here to get the Goemon equivalent of that episode, and we don't get it in the end, and I think that's a little disappointing.
Yeah, I 100% agree that I think you broke down the issue with the episode exactly, where it is focusing too much on that Lupin plot line, where the real core of the episode and the interest of the episode is with the Goemon stuff. This is also one where I felt like the production of the show is starting to get strained more, because I think in general the animation has been very good. In this episode I felt like a lot of the animation was getting like pushed, and that it was like just not quite at that level. It didn't feel as refined as some of the earlier stuff. I mean, but all of it is like storyboarded and directed really well. And so that ending sequence is fucking phenomenal in terms of how it's constructed. But it does feel like it is not getting like all the sort of time and attention that you got in, like, say, the animation in the end of the Ginny episode, which is so good. And is so like sort of technically interesting. Whereas in 24, I think the concept and how it's framed is all really good. The execution is not as strong. And that, I think, also hurts it a little bit because so much of the episode is fighting. And so some of the fighting between Goemon and Suidu, his like sort of rival friend, how many times has Goemon had some sort of like, here's this sort of like other trainee who is working with me, and then now, we have to be rivals, and or how many times have we met Goemon's master, who has been a different guy each time, which I do love that this is like your Goemon plot you go to. But anyways, some of those fights could feel a little bit lackluster because it just feels like they didn't have all the animation they needed. But that being said, like, when the Goemon plot works, it does work really well. It's your classic samurai plot of, they're two former students that through circumstances must have to fight each other. And that whole ending of Goemon standing in the rain, in the middle of the road, which he loves, just standing in the middle of the road waiting for cars to come by so he can cut them in half. But this is the best scene of Goemon standing in the middle of the road to cut a car in half because it's got so much drama. The way the rain plays into it, he has those flashes to his buddy who is like the body in the pool with blood pooling around him because his friend has been killed. And then he just straight up decapitates those dudes. He cuts through the car, but he also cuts through their heads. And it's like, usually when he cuts through the helicopters and stuff like that, the people are miraculously fine. Not this one. He just murders those dudes, and it's pretty good.
It's such a good ending. The specific boarding of it that you were alluding to, of standing in the rain, you have this close-up on his face with lightning like illuminating half of it. As he starts to pull the sword, you get the cut to the blue dragon lying dead in the pool. You get the car, and then it is this, you literally like see him almost like the heat axe in Gundam, cutting through the metal of the car and then going through the neck of the guy who's like, it's happening so fast, he hasn't even like registered what's happening. And then as that cut is happening, one more shot to the blue dragon, back to Goemon, posing like having finished, car blows up, he puts the sword away, and it's over. We go to the next episode preview. And again, I think there's a version of this episode where that is an all-time great ending to an all-time great episode. It's an all-time great ending to a fine episode instead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
Next, we have our two-parter, 27 and 28, codename Star of Alaska. And the Star of Alaska is a one-way ticket to hell, which is a pretty good title pair of episodes. This is sort of like a big Cold War plot episode. I really like this two-parter. I think it's a lot of fun. It's pretty Jigen-focused, kind of in the vein of some of the big Jigen episodes that we got last time, where they are chasing this object called the Star of Alaska. And there's a lot going on here. One thing I like is that the CIA is just straight up the bad guys in this one. It is not like, and from the American perspective, we don't often see that in Cold War stories, but this is just full on. The CIA are the bastards that they are fighting, and they're kind of like more aligned with the Russians. It's interesting in that level. But the Star of Alaska is this ring that belonged to the wife of this woman that Jigen, it's another one, in the same way Goemon has had like 10 masters, Jigen has had a lot of former partners. This is his former partner, George Cougar, and George's wife, who was also sweet on Jigen. And Jigen and her, they get in this whole adventure in this episode, and George Cougar is the guy who hid. The Star of Alaska is this item that is a sample of, it's like a bio thing that can turn arid, like cold land into good farming land for wheat, so that the KG...
It's a genetic... Well, what it is, it's a genetically modified strand of wheat. So it's like genetically modified wheat that can grow in the snow, and so that's what the Soviets want, so that way they can grow wheat in Siberia, and that's why the CIA don't want it out there. Yes. So it's like, it's such a good Cold War style plot, because it's like, obviously, like, I think it's strange credibility in the real world to have this kind of wheat that would be able to grow in those conditions, because that doesn't make any sense. But it's like, it's plausible enough that it sort of passes the sniff test, so you can kind of buy into that core setup. And I think how it reflects on the CIA, that their whole mission would be, we have to just make sure that this thing that would like save millions of lives because of how it would change the like way we would be able to grow food in so many areas of the world that currently we can't use that land for anything. It could like really, help a lot of places on the planet and a lot of people in a lot of countries, but it would also help the Soviets. So we got to destroy it. That's a really good plot for a Cold War story.
And again, it aligns you with, just as a human being, you want the people of Siberia to have wheat. So the CIA are just monsters here, which I think is an interesting perspective. Because the CIA were fucking monsters in this period. Maybe still are. Anyway, but yeah. And it's a very good Jigen story. It's got a lot of great moody atmosphere. I think it being 2 parts is a great... It allows it to breathe. I think it's more like a mini movie than it is like an episode of TV. I think all of that is good. There's a whole part of the plot, the cliffhanger at the end of part 1 is Barbara, the woman they're with, gets sniped, and you think she's dead. And at the start of part 2, she lived because the bullet hit her pendant. And you think like, oh, okay, that's kind of your cheap, just, this is how we got out of the cliffhanger. No, it's actually really smart because this was George Cougar, did this on purpose. Oh, by the way, George Cougar's actual nickname they call him is Lefty Joe. I need to say that because Lefty Joe is a great thing to hear Kiyoshi Kobayashi say as Jigen. Anyway, Joe shot her on purpose, and he's such a good shot, he knew he would hit the locket, and the Star of Alaska is inside the bullet. And that is it. And he knew Jigen would protect her. That is a brilliant little plot turn. And yeah, it's just a very good story. Great animation. All the snowy animation out there in Alaska. All of that is beautiful. A lot of heavy hitters doing work here. Yuzo Aoki did the animation direction. Yutaka Kaneko on the scripting. It's very kind of James Bondy in places. I think it's got a good use of most of the cast. Even Zenigata has some good stuff in this one. It's definitely a very solid standout. I like this one a lot.
Yeah, it's really good. It's definitely like the sort of highlight Jigen episode, at least of the stuff that, or episodes, I guess, of the stuff that we watched, certainly. Whereas Jigen in Cold War spy thriller just goes so well together. Yes. It's just it's a match made in heaven. And there is just lots of really great animation here. They do a lot of really high contrast stuff using shadows really heavily. And these, as you talked about, you've got a lot of stuff with the snow that looks great. There is in the first of the 2 episodes, there's a really great shot. And then they actually kind of reuse some of this at the end. But this is the shot when Jigen is meeting Barbara for the first time. You have this fantastic shot where she's in the background. You're seeing her from behind and she's leaning on a railing. And then in the foreground, you see Jigen's hand and he's holding a bottle of whiskey in a white rose as he's walking up towards Barbara, and you're kind of following him from that perspective. It's a really great moody shot that, again, they kind of reuse some of that framing at the end, where it has a really nice melancholy ending of where Barbara is going to leave to go try to be with Lefty Joe, even though she knows that Lefty has abandoned her, and all that kind of stuff. And that, he tried to shoot that locket, but he would have probably been fine if it had hit and killed her. But she's still going to be with him and not with Jigen, which is a nice, bittersweet melancholy ending that fits the whole very kind of cold mood of these episodes. It's just really nicely done.
Yeah. There's also a bunch of good jokes, including one with Jigen where he is being interrogated by electrocution, and they're asking him for the Star of Alaska, and he says, I know plenty of Hollywood stars, and he starts listing people like Humphrey Bogart and Marlon Brando and John Wayne, and I think it's a great Jigen comeback that feels a little bit like a follow-up to that scene in The Mystery of Mamo, where he says, I used to love Humphrey Bogart, but not anymore, to the American officer. That's great. The very end of this, where Lupin puts the seed from the Star of Alaska into a bunch of kids' balloons, and so hoping it will sprout somewhere. And Fujiko is mad because she wanted to sell it, but everyone else in the gang is just kind of looking on, hopefully, is a beautiful little ending that feels very true. Lupin would not sell that thing. I think he would absolutely tie it to a balloon and send it off. So, yeah.
Yeah, again, he's interested in the thrill of the adventure. He doesn't need the money from the Star of Alaska. You did, I think, one thing I do want to point out about that joke you pointed out of Jigen and the Hollywood Star is that it comes back later in that scene when they're torturing him, and one of the guys is like, you gotta stop, you're going too far, he'll be killed. And then the Soviet dude goes, oh, who cares, Humphrey Bogart and John Wayne are dead too. And I thought that was a fucking great great fucking comeback that makes no sense at all, but was very funny.
Another one of my favorites is episode 30, A Cocktail Named Revenge. This is a cool
Or
episode.
the name of the cocktail is Revenge, if you want the most awkwardly translated version of that title ever made.
This episode starts with this long scene where Lupin is tending bar at this like club, and a woman in pink walks in from the rain. The sense of atmosphere is just so thick. You've got Yuji Ono doing just great stuff with like saxophone on the soundtrack. Lupin says she looks like a pink Rolls Royce. A lot of dialogue like that. Lupin says he'll make her a cocktail, and then the bottle of spirits is called Revenge. That's the cocktail called Revenge. They do this focus pull through the wine glass Lupin holds up and looks at her through, and that's how we first see the woman. And then they're talking about, like, the people in the bar. You've just got Yasuo Yamada kind of, like, picking this woman's brain. I love all of that. He introduces this idea of the bartender's rest, which is there's a bullet hole in the window near him, and he tosses a dart out of it and flattens the tire of a cop car, which makes her laugh. She says, "Won't that cause an accident?" And he says, "Nah, I only aim at cop cars." That's a pretty fucking great line. Mm-hmm. I like the ACAB energy here. But this scene, I love so much. I would absolutely watch a series that was just Yasuo Yamada's Lupin tending bar and talking to interesting customers. The episode continues to be very good when the plot kicks in. I just love that opening scene. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal because it plays it for so long where you don't know like what's going on here. It's like a rare instance where you're not automatically assuming Lupin's POV. You're very much assuming the POV of this woman who has walked into the bar and then slowly trying to unravel both why is she here, but then also what is Lupin's role in this? Like, how is he involved? And then like when is the rest of the gang kind of come into the story as well? And then as it sort of starts to play out, and it's the whole like bank heist, and she needs or like there's a heist on the like armored trucks or whatever, and she wants revenge on the guy who owns it, and like it has all the money that's being transported from the bank because that guy killed her dad. Like all of that is also really good, but that opening sequence is just such a unique way to enter an episode of Lupin.
Absolutely. And it really is basically the whole first half of the episode is in and out of that scenario because Lupin does like step away from the bar for a second and talks to Jigen in a back alley. We learn he's working with Fujiko to do this robbery. So there's all these other moving pieces, but you keep coming back to the bar and him talking to this lady. And you have these just incredible shots. One of my favorite shots in any Lupin show is this one where she is drinking her cocktail framed against the bullet hole in the window, and there's this flash of light, so she's just a silhouette for part of it. Just a bunch of great images like that. And you learn that Lupin knows more about her than he's letting on, because he's done all the research, and the guy they're robbing is this guy, Jack Matosa, who was a successful businessman with an evil mustache, who murdered her father in order to push through this merger and become rich. And so Lupin is doing his sort of normal sort of what is chivalric for Lupin thing of he is going to get a ton of gold. He makes no apologies for that. But while he's at it, he's going to help this woman get revenge by really fucking this guy over. There's this whole other motif where they do all these Shakespeare references and are talking about this kind of as a play. And I think all of that's very fun. And ultimately they do this whole thing where Fujiko, which she's done a couple of times in the series at this point, uses a camera and does this, gets Jack on camera, like confessing to his crimes. And so Zenigata goes and confronts Jack and arrests him. So the revenge is not even killing him, but it's getting him put in jail for justice. And I think it does do a good job in the way some of the other Part 3 episodes we've talked about, Sean, have done, of mixing the kinder, more heroic Lupin with the edgier crime story, where it still has that very kind of urban, crime movie flavor. It has the bartending. He does get away with a fucking mountain of gold, but he also has this like chivalry towards Sarah that is nice and feels all in character to me.
Yeah, I have the exact same thing in my notes, that it feels like it toes the line perfectly between the two different styles of Lupin, where he still feels like he's ultimately heroic. He's a character you can root for because he's going to do the right thing, broadly speaking, particularly for this woman. But he's not just sort of like magnanimous and altruistic or whatever about it. It is still couched in this whole caper. Yeah, it is just really well done. The whole episode, I think, looks really nice. I know that this is like the first one for me that we watched where you really feel how much the style has shifted by this point. I think you still had the remnants of it in the Alaska episodes, but now this is like the beginning of the like much more sort of rubbery animation that characterizes the second half of the show. I think it just like works really well. Here, this also uses Zenigata better than a lot of the other episodes because part of the plot is having Zenigata arrest the guy. And so that finds like a nice way for Zenigata to be involved in the main plot of the episode. That works really well. And then it has, as a lot of these good Part 3 episodes have, a really nice bittersweet ending where he gives her the key for the half of the gold that's hers. But she wants to be with Lupin. She wants like this new life or whatever. But he obviously leaves and she goes back to the bar, has a cocktail at like this like kind of wrecked empty bar now, and then leaves the key in the empty glass and leaves. Really just nice moody ending.
Yeah, it's one of many episodes in the series that feel like they're channeling like Casablanca or something, and just it works really well. Lupin, this is Lupin as played by Humphrey Bogart, kind of, and it's very good.
I have it on good authority that Humphrey Bogart is dead. So,
episode 31, a turnabout, a comeback, and a reversal, which is one of my favorite sort of comedy episodes of the series. It is big caper hijinks, but I think it's big caper hijinks in a way that feels uniquely Part 3, in that it's got this anarchic kind of twisty flair to it. The main story is about, it's down in Mexico, some racist caricatures we can talk about. But overall, it's interesting. It is this story about Zenigata is having to protect these Renoir paintings from Lupin. And it is Mr. Guerlain, the richest man in Mexico, and the Merchant of Death, who is an art collector of stolen goods. And so this is the person that they are getting one over on. And Fujiko is kind of moving between Mr. Guerlain and Lupin. And really, once this gets going, it's just some fantastic, like, you really get that rubbery kind of Looney Tunes character animation in full force at this point, and there's some pretty great stuff here.
Yeah, I think for me, what really stood out is, I mean, you obviously, so you have the sort of the reversals or whatever that in the title, the Yakten, where it's like, it is about this sort of like ridiculous, like it's kind of going back and forth between them, where it's like, it seems like, oh, Lupin's got the upper hand, then this other guy's got the upper hand, now it's Lupin again. But this had, I think, one of like the best endings in terms of like a big action way of any of these episodes, where the whole thing happens where Lupin, disguised as Zenigata, goes back to the guy whose art museum he's trying to steal the art from. He takes Goemon's sword, Zantetsuken, and he just does this whole thing where he's like, oh, well, Lupin's coming back to steal the thing, so I need to do, like, here, let me take care of this, I'll protect the art, here, let me just take the Zantetsuken, and he just sort of cuts this big hole in the thing while the art museum guy's like, what the fuck is he doing? Like, what is going on? Why is this, like, Zenigata doing all this stuff? And then you start slowly piecing together that, oh, he's, like, cutting a perfect hole around this whole room. And then fucking Lupin steals the entire room that the art is in with a giant crane. And he, like, stands on top of it. And one of the best Lupin shots ever is the shot looking up at him from down below as he's riding the room up with the crane. And an instrumental version of Sexy Adventure starts playing. And it's just like a real feel-good, like, stand-up and start cheering moment. Because, you know, he's been, you know, this is a rare episode where it feels like Lupin, it was at a disadvantage for so much of the adventure, that sense of like, oh, he is getting played, like, legitimately for a lot of it. So him coming out on top at the end feels really, really satisfying.
And it's just, I wrote in my notes that ending where he's just got, it's because it's not like a little crane. It's this just massive, comically large crane he's having to use because he's dragging like half a building. It basically feels like the end of Fast 5, the fifth Fast and Furious movie, where they're driving away with the safe. It's that, but on steroids, and they're driving down a fucking mountain with it. The final image with the whole rig against the sunset as Zenigata is chasing them is just perfect. Very good use of Zenigata in this one. And yeah, all of the different like reversals and comebacks and all of that. There's this scene in the middle middle of the episode where they are driving through the trucks with one of them they think has the Renoir paintings, and they fan out in 3 separate highways, and Lupin is following on one highway, and then he learns, okay, it's on this other highway, and he's being tricked, but he doesn't know that. But they have to get from one highway to the other, so they drive across like this desert area and then get back up onto the other highway. And the animation there, very clearly inspired from some of the stuff in Cagliostro with like the big car chase there, because it's the same kind of like jalopy they're in, and you even have Jigen sort of out of the sunroof doing shooting, and it's just the like physics of the car and the rubberiness of it. This one really does like it feels like the turning point for part 3, where this is now like this would be very at home next to certain like Looney Tunes cartoons or some Friz Freleng stuff or some Tex Avery stuff, very much so in like the 1950s. I fucking love it.
Yeah, no, it's very good, and yeah, this is where I feel like that rubbery animation is like that you got a taste of on the previous episode. Here, it just so feels like it comes together to allow that big action stuff to play in a way that the art style for the first half of the series would not have that kind of sequence, right? It like the first half of the show, it focused much more on like kind of gunfights and duels and stuff that like are a little bit easier to do. Whereas you're having this big elaborate car chase across like all these moving pieces and the giant trucks that box them in. There's so much detail that goes into that animation that I think you really feel how much the shift in aesthetic has paid off for some of those scenes in this episode.
It does feel like the team found a way to reinvigorate themselves with some of the limitations that they had, in that they just can't, while they're also doing the movie and everything, give this the level of like detail it would have, but they can kind of strip it down and have more motion, and that is something that really pays off in a lot of these final episodes. Episode 34, Manhattan Crisis, has a lot of good stuff in it. It also starts with this really uncomfortable scene in Harlem where they are talking to some black characters, and there's just some really bad caricatures here. You've got 2 drunk black guys like living homeless on the street. There's a group of black kids tearing a car apart. When there's this scared guy working for the mafia that they question who says, "I want to go back to Africa," and Lupin gives him the money to do that. All of that pretty fucked up. I do at least like the joke that guy does get sniped, but he lives because he was wearing a false head, and Lupin comments, "He sure is a cautious fellow," which would be a funny punchline in other circumstances. It is, I will say, it is very much, and it almost feels like I wonder if this was like what they were referencing, obviously more than any reality, the James Bond movie Live and Let Die, which is like the voodoo movie in Harlem that is the most racist James Bond thing. I will say, at the very least, Lupin is not like condescending to all the black characters the way James Bond is, where Roger Moore is like, "You should all talk civilized," and I kind of roll my eyes at that. But it is like it's very minstrel show kind of, even Step and Fetch It kind of things going on here. It's only the first couple minutes of the episode; it doesn't come back, but it is pretty gross.
Yeah, no, it definitely, it is. It stands out a lot because that's where it's like, for a lot of the other racial stuff, it mostly is confined more to the character designs than it is to the writing. And here it's like, it is very much in the writing in those scenes as well.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I do think after that point, I like this one quite a bit. It's a New York Mafia plot. There's a lot of New York Mafia plots in part 3, and in the movie we're going to talk about. You have this whole thing where Fujiko is like playing with this like graffiti artist young punk to like kind of like get around, and and winds up betraying him at the end. All of that is very funny. There's some good scenes here. Lupin gets in this shootout with the mafia, and he starts calling himself Elliot Ness and pretending he's one of the Untouchables, and it's very funny both because of Yasuo Yamada, and then Goemon is really annoyed and is saying it's all obnoxious nonsense. But then as Goemon starts fighting, he yells, "This is a Shinsengumi raid!" Oh no, Lupin's stupidity has infected me, which is one of the funniest uses of Goemon, making a little, that's like a group, famous group of samurai kind of thing he's referencing, and so he does his own play acting here that is very funny. But mostly you just have a lot of...
Who recently played Like a Dragon Ishin. I also, when I run into a room, go, "This is a Shinsengumi raid," because if you've played enough of that game, it's just like, you just got to do it. It's fun.
Yes. So anyway, there's a lot of just very good, crazy character animation similar to the last one. Just a lot of fluidity, a lot of cartoon zaniness. Nothing super special, but I do like the bulk of this one.
Yeah, I mean, this one didn't really stand out too much to me. I think there's one, other than the racism at the beginning, that was like, because I had two notes on this. I had that, and then my other main note for this episode was there's a big sequence in the middle that's really well done, where Lupin and Jigen are running away, but like every single person they run into is a different, like, associated with the mafia, and so it's like, oh,
it's
the
like
guy
John
who's the
Wick.
taxi driver.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it made me think exactly, yes, of like John Wick 3. It's like the taxi driver, it's like the guy who owns the convenience store, it's like every single person they run into, and every single one is like, Lupin's like, so is he with the mafia too? And Jigen's like, I guess so. And it's just like, it keeps on doing that. That to me is like the big thing that I thought was well done in this episode. That's a very fun scene.
Yeah. There's also a shot where there's this whole thing where they're trying to get into the big building where the mafia has their hideout and has all their money. And there's this fantastic shot of Jigen swinging on and then running along the ground with this giant tree trunk that they've rigged to hit the building. And it's just, there's a lot of shots like that where the animation is just very virtuosic and silly and out there. And I love all that stuff. Okay, episode 37, Pops boils over with rage. This is a Pops episode, which made me happy because Zenigata is my fave. I found this one pretty disappointing, I have to be honest. I think the plot, there's an interesting setup where the first half is that Zenigata is approached by this guy. Zenigata winds up being able to arrest Lupin for a moment, and then Lupin gets away. That's this whole thing about this guy, Old Man Carlos, and his treasure, and that's kind of, we'll come back to. But Zenigata gets followed by this young woman who is looking for Lupin because she wants to kill him, because Lupin stole a priceless family heirloom from her, and then her dad committed suicide over it, which then sent her mom into an illness that she died from. And so Zenigata is like, wow, that's a terrible thing Lupin did. I will help you out. And then seemingly Lupin kills this woman, and so Zenigata, Pops, does indeed boil over with rage in a very cool scene right before the act break, where they illustrate it with him like standing on a mountain and like the spirit of a dragon comes out and a wolf, and it's very cool. But they don't really do much with it. It's obviously a trick, and Lupin didn't do any of that stuff. And it's fairly boilerplate. It does kind of make me want, I would like to see the episode where Lupin really does do something so awful that Zenigata loses it. That is an interesting idea for an episode. This one does not really follow through on it.
Yeah, I think I generally feel the same way. One thing that did stand out to me, like as happened with a lot of Part 3 ones, the one-off like villain of the episode, Anne, is really interesting. Like honestly, that's like the part of the episode that's a lot better than the Zenigata stuff, because it's that whole thing where you've got the safecracker dude who had died, and then his grandson is like at this funeral, but then you have this other character, Anne, who is the one who's like sort of with Zenigata that supposedly Lupin has killed, but then you find out that the whole time Anne and the grandson is the same person. Anne has been disguised as the grandson. She's actually the granddaughter of the safecracker guy, and Fujiko has been teaching her all of her tricks, because Fujiko's trying to use her to get the money. But then Anne betrays Fujiko. It's like, that's like, honestly, that's like a way better plot for a Lupin episode. And I think kind of in some ways the Zenigata stuff gets in the way of that plot line. And if like the episode could have like more committed to that side of it and made that the full focus, and maybe had it more be like, instead of Anne doing stuff with Zenigata, it was Anne doing stuff with Lupin, maybe that would have been like a better overall plot, because I think the relationship between Anne and Fujiko is really interesting. Then the Pop stuff is fun, but we have seen that plot line in multiple other episodes at this point, so it doesn't really stand out.
Yeah. I also think like the logic for how Anne lives. So Anne obviously fakes her death when Lupin's, because she shoots at Lupin and then Lupin shoots back. And she lives because Lupin only uses a tranq dart, and she knows that because from Fujiko. But I did see that, I went, no, he doesn't. Absolutely not. Does Lupin just go around with a tranq dart loaded in his Walther P-38? That's like, I don't even think in the Miyazaki interpretation of Lupin, he walks around with a tranq dart because he's so worried about killing innocent people. I don't know. I just, that rubbed me a little bit off. But I agree with all of this, and I think it is an interesting plot. My favorite moment here is at the very end. At this point, we have seen the plot line where Zenigata thinks Lupin is dead and gets very sad. We've seen that many times. And it is always funny because Goro Naya makes it funny. But I do like this variation of it where Zenigata thinks he has killed Lupin because Lupin wound up faking his death the same way An did. And at the end of the episode, you see him walking to the graveyard. He has flowers and he says, "I've made a decision, Lupin. I'll spend the rest of my life praying over your grave," which is such a great image. And as he's walking, he walks right by Lupin and the gang who are on their car. And Yasuo Yamada goes, "To-chan, doko iku no?" Which is like, "Hey, Pops, where are you going?" But he sings it. And I will say one of my favorite things about part 3 is they let Yasuo Yamada do singing a lot of just little lines where he just does some singing, and it's always so funny. And I love that. To-chan, doko iku no? And then Zenigata is very confused and sad. And there's a great little closing animation of everyone driving away as Zenigata jumps for joy because Lupin is alive, but hits his head on a cross and hurts himself.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's that little ending bit is good, but the overall episode could have been a bit better.
Here's an episode that couldn't have been better. Episode 38, Letitia, who loved Lupin. And you might think, oh, is this like just a nice episode about a woman who, maybe falls in love with Lupin because he's going to help her get revenge for her dad or something, the standard plot. No, it is about a dolphin. It is about the missing arm of a mermaid statue in in Denmark. Because the statue was actually the Little Mermaid statue from the Hans Christian Andersen story. I don't know if that's an actual thing in Denmark, that there's like a beloved statue of this, but in the world of Lupin III there is. It's missing its arm. Everyone is mad. Goemon is framed by the museum director so that Lupin will come out to try to save Goemon by finding the real arm. But to find the real arm, he needs to get a special dolphin and attach a dolphin language communicator to it so they can talk to the dolphin. And the dolphin falls in love with Lupin and helps him solve the case. And it is delightful.
Yeah, I was very happy that we did 37 and into 38, because that meant, and apparently you watched the 37 on Crunchyroll, so you didn't get to see this, but the true Lupin the Third Part 3 experience is finishing watching Pop Spoils Over with rage, seeing the next on preview, knowing that the next episode is called like Letitia Loved Me or whatever, and so I knew that was the title of the next episode, assuming it was about a lady named Letitia that falls in love with Lupin or something. And so I know what the title is, but then you see the next on preview, and the first thing you see is a fucking dolphin, and they call the dolphin Letitia. I'm like, wait, what? And then you realize, okay, so the next episode is about a dolphin named Letitia who falls in love with Lupin, and they go on like a nautical adventure together. And that like is so good. That should be its own fucking TV show. Like that's what Lupin the Third Part 4 should have been, is they added Letitia into the main cast. It's the first time they've added a character into the full main cast of Lupin the Third ever. And it's Letitia the dolphin, and all their adventures are nautical themed. Because of course you can't bring Letitia anywhere else. It would kind of limit the scope of the show a little bit, unless you get very creative. But the whole concept of him partnering up with this dolphin lady, and that there's like some sort of magical fucking dolphin language translation device that allows her to talk to Lupin, and they get married. Like canonically speaking, Lupin is married to Letitia. Like that goes through at the end of this episode. The end of the episode is Letitia summoning all of her dolphin friends to help Lupin out on the condition that Lupin marries her. And then she basically drags Lupin away into the ocean while everybody else like laughs as he gets dragged away by this dolphin to be forced into dolphin human marriage. And like, as far as I'm concerned, Letitia is like, Mrs. Lupin from now on.
I am looking at the Lupin the Third wiki, and I'm looking under Lupin, and it does not say spouse, Letitia, parentheses, dolphin. I think I need to add that. Can I edit this wiki and put that in there? Because you are correct. It is canonical. This episode is so great, because there's this very twisty plot where Fujiko is fucking evil in this one. Fujiko full on tries to murder Lupin, Jigen, and Goemon, and thinks she has done it for a good stretch of this episode. Thinks she has murdered all of them, and then locks up Letitia the dolphin in an aquarium to like be a fucking prisoner, and just does all. there's no like twist like Fujiko actually wanted to. No, she's just evil in this one, which is kind of hilarious because Letitia has an entire rivalry with Fujiko because she knows Lupin loves Fujiko and Letitia is very jealous of her. And so part of why Letitia solves the case. She is like swimming around and there's this great scene where she hears Fujiko talking to the museum guys who are coming up with this entire plot. Because the whole idea was this is one of many episodes in part 3 that are about insurance fraud. That is the thing to know about Lupin the Third Part 3 is that a lot of stories are about people using Lupin to steal a fake version of their real treasure so that they can claim the insurance but still have the original treasure. That's like half of the episodes we watched, I feel like, are insurance fraud stories. And that's basically what this is. But it is not Lupin who figures that all out. It's Letitia who is swimming around with a little microphone in her mouth, spying on everyone. What a good fucking dolphin. She rocks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common theme we've been talking about with part 3 is that it has like the best one-off supporting characters in Lupin episodes, and Letitia absolutely is in that pantheon. It's just because she like legitimately is a good character. Like it's a good performance. It's like it doesn't. By the end, it doesn't just feel like a gimmick. It like legitimately, I've watched the last episode. I was like, I would be totally fine if Letitia just showed up in more episodes because she's a really good character and I like her weird relationship with everybody else, particularly Lupin and Fujiko. It's fun.
This one also has like all 5 characters used fantastically. There's really good moments with all of them. Zenigata has this whole thing where he is camped outside Goemon's prison with a giant pile of instant ramen because he's waiting for Lupin to come save Goemon. And then he hears the thing about the dolphin, leading to a fantastic screenshot I took that is just a surprise Zenigata saying, Lupin is using a dolphin to find the mermaid's arm, which is a great sentence. It should say that on the back of the box. You buy Lupin the Third Part 3, and on the back it should say, Lupin uses a dolphin to find a mermaid's arm. And so you have that whole plot. Zenigata is there at the end with all of the dolphin shit. Goemon has a whole thing where he is trying to get like real Japanese natto, and he is given it by Fujiko, but it has a bomb in it, but he's reluctant to give it up because it's his favorite food. And so there's this great cartoony animation where he and Jigen are fighting over it. Oh man. And then it all comes together in the dolphin wedding scene where we now have a bunch of dolphins in the image, and you have this long pan left to right of like Goemon and Jigen are with the dolphins. All the dolphins are like cartoony and adorable and waving at the camera as Lupin gets married, and Fujiko just gets the diamond and goes away. So Fujiko wins this one. Yep. And Lupin now is married to a dolphin.
Fujiko wins most of them, honestly. Like, usually she gets away with whatever she wants, and Lupin's, like, fine with it. In this one, he's less fine with it because he's been, taken by the dolphins and presumably has to live in, like, the dolphin kingdom. I don't know where the fuck they go. I don't know if she goes back to, like, SeaWorld or whatever she was in because she was, like, a trained dolphin. But, yeah, like, this is definitely, like, one of the wackiest endings we've seen where there's no, like, because most endings of Lupin episodes are about, like, a resetting to the status quo where Lupin either has the loot or Fujiko has the loot or whatever, but the heist has happened and then he's getting away and Zenigata is chasing him. It's like, no, this is Lupin has been taken by Letitia the Dolphin and gone to somewhere you don't know where it is. Like, he's separated from everybody else, Zenigata and his friends. And it's like, if this was the last episode of Lupin the Third, it would be like, okay, well, that's it. That's how the story ends, because the status quo has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer about Lupin going on heists and running away from Zenigata. It is now about his married life with Letitia Dolphin.
And you know what? As far as I'm concerned, if none of the future episodes are specials, so show Lupin in a court of law getting this marriage annulled, then he is still married to Letitia. Whatever else happens, that is my canon.
But it has to be a dolphin court, because human court has no jurisdiction over dolphin marriages.
Episode 40, A Lotto Ticket to Riot. I like this one because I think it has a very good use of Zenigata. The whole story is basically there's this lottery run by this guy named Tony Luckino, Luckino, Luckino. It's great. And it starts with a $50 million lottery, but next week it's going to be $500 million. Tony plans to rig it. Fujiko is planted inside the game, and Lupin and company obviously plan to steal the money. But Pops is really the star here because Zenigata is sort of tasked to guard this. And he also is dreaming of winning the lottery because he is a very poor ICPO police officer. There is a 1-2-3 punch of jokes here that is one of my favorite uses of Zenigata ever. First is Zenigata thinking about how if he won the lottery, he says he would give up on instant ramen and move up the ladder to Katsudan. I just about died laughing at that. That is so good. Then you have Lupin come up, and he is disguised as a TV presenter interviewing Zenigata and needles him into agreeing to donate all the winnings to social services if he won. So now Zenigata on TV has promised that he will give all the money back to the people if he wins. So he's not going to move up to Katsudan. And then Pops goes to buy a ticket, but because of all this mayhem, they're sold out and he doesn't get one. That 1-2-3 punch. Perfect. Everything else in this episode could be shit, and I would love it. That's so good.
Yeah, that all of that is incredibly funny. But then, but like the core, this is just like a really good heist episode because the core plot of it just works really well. It's another insurance fraud episode, like you're just pointing out with the Mermaid Arm one, because it's about Tony trying to sort of, orchestrate this whole thing of having Lupin steal the lottery money so that he can get the insurance on it, but also it's fake lottery money, so you would have both the actual lottery money and the insurance you would get from it. Which is literally the plot line of like the exact next episode we'll talk about. Our Papa, or no, not our Papa's thief. It's Pops was adopted to the family is the exact same plot, just about a jewel instead of lottery money. But it's a good plot line. It like works well. But the best part of it is how all of the stuff works out of like the way that Lupin plays the guy. One to like trick him so that Lupin can get let into the big vault, because there's this like sort of electrified floor and all this stuff, and so he tricks that guy so Lupin can see his footprint, so he figures out how to get into the vault and all this. And at the end, when you realize the whole thing that's happened is that Lupin has created 2 fake tickets that have the right combination, where he's tricked the guy into changing the combination to this ticket that Lupin has, that Tony now has, so that like Tony thinks, okay, now this is going to be the actual winning ticket. I'll change the winning numbers to this ticket. But that ticket has the same numbers as the ticket that Lupin or Jigen in disguise gave to Zenigata. So there's 2 tickets with the winning numbers that Lupin has tricked Tony into changing it to. So that way, when the numbers get called, Zenigata is fighting over those numbers and stuff. And then I love like the very, very end, the kind of kiss-off line is that Lupin bought the act, like that is the real ticket, is the one that Lupin had originally bought like way at the beginning of the episode, and that was the one he had made the 2 duplicates of, so he has had the real winning ticket the whole time. Just the way that sequence of events plays out as you see that Lupin has, this is like a really good genius Lupin moment where he has like orchestrated everything so perfectly around this very convoluted plot line, distributing these tickets and tricking him into changing the numbers. So that Lupin can get away with everything. It's just like a very nice twist at the end.
And also it means that by his logic, the money is rightfully his. He won the lottery. It was his numbers, which is just so smart. Another little thing you get here is Lupin is disguised as Tony, but he pulls off the mask. So for a lot of it, he's wearing Tony's outfit, which has a yellow jacket, which gives us a little glimpse of what it might look like if we ever did Yellow Jacket Lupin. And we'll actually, when we talk next week, there is a future character designer wanted to do that and did some concept sketches and it got vetoed. I think they need to do that. Yellow Jacket Lupin looks good. We should do that one day. I like it here.
Yeah, it's there's only so many colors, and yellow's a good one. So yeah, I'm down for Yellow Jacket Lupin.
All right, episode 44. Our Papa's a Thief. Wow, this one's great. This one is there's some kind of heist going on. Honestly, I don't quite remember, because what this episode is actually about is Lupin being approached by all these little kids who have letters claiming from their supposed mother claiming that Lupin had sex with him and this is the child. And Lupin has a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a newborn, and Goemon and Jigen are slut-shaming him up and down for it until suddenly, oh no, a separate little girl is claiming Jigen as her dad, and then a little boy, and then Goemon is out buying baby supplies, complaining about how sinful his friends are, which is great. And then a little boy claims to be Goemon's, and now they are running a nursery with all these fucking kids. And they are trying to finish this job, which involves them doing all this digging under this vault to try to get these jewels. But they've got all these fucking kids around. Oh my god, it's great.
Yeah, it's great. And this is like the most sexually frank episode of Lupin we've ever seen, because like it's, it just like directly states that yes, Lupin like is sleeping around with all these women all the time, because like Jigen says it's like it could very much easily it could be your kid, and Lupin does not really deny it in any way. Which is like, obviously we logically know that that is what like a character like Lupin would be doing. But these shows never acknowledge that directly, because it's just probably a little bit over the line. So there's something nice about the show just being like, yeah, no, absolutely. Like Lupin could just have random kids that he does not know about, because that's the nature of the sexual life he lives. And it does give Goemon early has a one-liner that particularly the delivery is so fucking good on that I just lost my shit, where he just says like, honestly, it's surprising this hasn't happened sooner. And it's just the like resigned way with which he's just like, yep, it's like, I've been expecting this for a while. It's very funny. Yeah, and then the other part of the episode that's very sexually frank, because you have the whole Fujiko side where she is with the guy who owns the jewels or whatever that Lupin's trying to heist. In like a very roundabout way, that guy has created the thing of where the kids and all that shit are with Lupin. But
it's
like
Mackie runs an actor's studio, and the kids are all acting students, which is great. Yeah.
Yes, it's an amazing twist where, yes, you find out that they're all, like, acting kids at this acting studio, which is very funny. But also, like, Fujiko is with this guy, and I believe this is the first time that it has, like, directly, like, implied that Fujiko is sleeping with the, like, these random, like, criminals and stuff that she's with in each episode. Where it's like you always know that like probably she is in a romantic relationship with these people and that she would be sleeping with them. But this one, there's like a scene where they kiss and they're in a bed, and then it like fades to black and it comes back up and it's morning the next day. And I was like, oh my God, like this is the first time the show has actually gone that far to depict this kind of relationship, rather than just being a thing where you're an adult and you understand, yeah, probably she's sleeping with whoever the random guy is. And I just thought that there's something interesting about this episode being the one where they're just like, yeah, no, all these people are fucking. Like, the episode isn't particularly erotic or anything. It doesn't have a bunch of nudity. It's just like, yeah, these people fuck. What about it? And there's just something very like nice about the cartoon, like the show just sort of acknowledging that that's a reality for these people.
We're casting a new James Bond, and we're opening that up now since Daniel Craig has left. I think the next James Bond movie should be about this, of 007 having to confront just how many kids he would have all over the world. Just by statistics, accidents happen, and he has slept around a lot. And we're not shaming him for it, but he should be paying child support at a minimum. Yeah.
But I wanted to have the same twist where actually they're not even really his kids, and like the bad guy has hired a bunch of child actors from an actor studio.
Well, because then you also get this, you get the great moment at the end where Lupin is like, wow, you guys did a great job. I really thought you were my kid, which is great. I always like, Lupin is always good with children. I don't know what it is, but he is. He's very funny with them. And lest we forget, this is also, I do think these later episodes show a marked improvement in how they're using Zenigata, and this one is great, where Zenigata learns about the kids and has this breakdown, where he's like, I didn't know you guys had families, compared to me, having spent my life chasing this fool. I never found a kind wife. I don't have any darling children. My fate won't allow it. And then he's on the ground wailing, I want a wife. I want kids. And then through the rest of the episode, he's chasing them, yelling about how Lupin needs to be a better dad. There's this one amazing shot of him sticking his neck out the window, chasing them, going, you need to reform yourself for the children. And I love the idea that, like, this Zenigata, maybe he would let Lupin off if he would just be a good dad. He wouldn't arrest him. But he has to show he's changed. If Lupin is gainfully employed for his kids, Zenigata will let him go.
Yes, yeah. The way that Zenigata's whole motivation changes in the episode to just being like, you're setting a bad example for your kids is very funny.
Yep. Oh, there's also in that same scene is when there's this big chase where they run through this super tight alley and they think they've evaded Pops, and Pops instead just takes the police cruiser and somehow drives it through the super tight alley on its side. Fucking great. I love the cartoon logic of that. Anyway, this one slaps. episode 40. Oh, also, by the way, that is also an insurance scam episode. We forgot to mention it. I did find it in my notes. Mackie did have fake jewels, and he was planning to do insurance fraud. So this is at least 3 or 4 in a row that are insurance fraud episodes, including, I think, this next one too, right? Soaring on Scrap Wings. Is this... Maybe it's the next one. No. But
I don't remember. This is the one where they make the Zero fighter on the island.
Yeah.
And honestly, think this has insurance fraud.
For the Soaring on Scrap Wings, episode 46, it's plot-wise, I think, pretty messy, but the thing to mention about it is what you just mentioned, which is that they are at one point stranded on this island, and they find an old beat-up Zero fighter, which is the big the fighter plane that was used in World War II by the Japanese, and they decide to basically bring it back to life using all these kinds of things they find in the woods. They make like a wood shell for like the body of it and all of that, and I do like all of the stuff with the Zero because it's very creative and funny and has good animation. The plot stuff is kind of messy. It's this whole thing about like this massive corruption scheme, I guess they uncover, about the Japanese prime minister funneling funds to the U.S. vice president through these Hina dolls, but it's actually going to this international crime syndicate. It's a lot. I don't know if I remember everything about it.
Yeah, I think it was like there's like an arms deal that's happening between America and Japan, I think was the implication.
Yes.
That's like the money, but like the vice president of America is like also owns the arms manufacturing company. It's just like it's like a very weirdly convoluted thing it's being passed to them during this Hina Matsuri festival inside one of the Hina dolls. It's just like it's like way overly complicated for an episode that is just about let's have them stranded on an island and have to make like a wacky airplane on the island out of bamboo and shit. It makes you sad that Miyazaki couldn't be involved in the production of it because it's a whole episode about making a wacky plane. It's like if only it's like all they had to do was also give Fujiko a bob cut, and then Miyazaki would have been like, well, I know I said I was done with Lupin, but it's one with the plane and a lady that has a bob cut. Fuck, I gotta show up. It's in my contract.
It's not just a plane, it's a Zero fighter. He's obsessed with those things. He made a whole movie about them later in life. The Wind Rises. No, I like all that stuff. I do think, like, geopolitically, it's very naive because America and Japan don't need to do arms deals under the table. They do them over the table all the time. There have been many protests about it. And the idea that the vice president would have to hide being the head of a major arms factory, I have a little guy to introduce you to named Dick Cheney. Not hidden, just above the surface. Anyway, it's fine. Episode 49, The Day Pops Got Adopted. I like this one. This one is crazy. Interestingly, this is the first episode we've seen since part 1 that doesn't have the entire cast. Goemon and Fujiko do not appear in this one, which I actually think is nice because it allows for more focus. This is a Zenigata, Jigen, and Lupin episode. I do think we probably need a racism check on the main character here, or the Mexican main character, because this is another Mexico set episode with a woman named Madame Tequila, who has a diamond called the Black Pig of Mexico. And I do have to wonder, between this and G Gundam with the Tequila Gundam, is tequila the only thing Japanese animators know about Mexico? Because she's not just Madame Tequila, she runs the Tequila Corporation. I think there's more than one Tequila Corporation in Mexico, but is that the only thing the anime industry has picked up on, is that there is tequila in Mexico?
I mean, to be fair, they also put an Italian lady named like Miss Lasagna in the movie, so it's not just Mexico, but yeah, it is really weird. I don't know why the word tequila is like the thing that they latch onto, but yes, it did make me think of the Tequila Gundam in G Gundam as well. This episode 49 is the one that I was talking about earlier that has the exact same plot line as the lottery one. Only it's about the jewel from Mexico, because it is exactly the same. Like, oh, I've got a fake version of the jewel that I want Lupin to steal, so that way I can have the real jewel and I can take out the insurance on the fake jewel. It's just like they took that exact plot line, but then they just transplanted it into this one that then also has this weird plot that's about like she's so impressed by Zenigata's gumption at trying to capture Lupin that she's also like, I'm gonna make him an heir to the tequila company or whatever. And it's just
at first it's because she wants Zenigata off the scent of the insurance fraud, and by the end it becomes like sincere, but at first it's like it's a misdirect. But it is, the whole thing is crazy. Really, this is just pure Looney Tunes. This is Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. This is Coyote and the Roadrunner, because this one is mostly about Zenigata versus Lupin. There's a ton of amazing animation and comic hijinks. There's this whole part where Lupin is trying to figure out how to get into the compound. First, he has a jetpack that doesn't work well, and there's some very fun animation with Jigen running away as Lupin is like flying around him. A lot of actually very good jetpack animation. Then Lupin makes this giant digging car that I half expect to be from the Acme Corporation. It is such a, like, he just opens a box and has a giant digging car, and Zenigata finds him. And really, it's just there. And then eventually he does it with a big tractor. And there's just a lot of good back and forth between him and Zenigata, a lot of amazing animation. It is really just about the hijinks, and I think it does that fantastically well.
Yeah, this one, it just kind of reminds me of a part 2 episode, in that it is like, the plot is kind of like whatever. It's got this vague premise that it doesn't get to until the halfway point of the episode, which is the Zenigata getting adopted thing. But it is mostly just an excuse to have some very nicely animated cartoon hijinks.
Yeah. And there's even this whole thing at the end where Madame Tequila, after Lupin comes in and, as he often does, uses a giant vacuum to suck up all the money, Madame Tequila starts chucking bombs at him, winds up blowing up the entire compound, again, pure Looney Tunes, and so many explosions that the diamond they stole becomes a lump of coal, and they get nothing from the heist. So everybody winds up losing. I enjoy this one. It's very silly. And I think the thing that makes it so part 3 is that, like, nothing in part 2 looks like this. This is, like, so unique to how part 3 I think does character animation. It's very much in that kind of like Friz Freeling vein, and I like it a lot. Then you have another batshit crazy one to end on, episode 50, Orders to Destroy the Atomic Sub Ivanov. Put a pin in this one because the screenwriter Hiroshi Kashiwabara we will see again next week when we talk about A Voyage to Danger, which he wrote as an expanded version of this. He felt like the script was kind of rushed. He feels like he didn't get to do the story exactly how he wanted it. So that special is an expansion of what he did here. So like I said, put a pin in it. I think this one is kind of hilarious. It is about Lupin and Jigen stealing a fucking atomic submarine from the Russians called Ivanov. And then it is all of the intelligence agencies of the world trying to get it back, while Lupin is trying to go find buried treasure with it, and Fujiko is trying to auction the submarine off to the highest bidder, and the CIA, who are a bunch of fucking hippies fighting with the KGB until Goemon just cuts the submarine in half so they can each have half of it, and then everyone swims off. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. It's like a big, weird Cold War farce, basically. That it's it's just kind of like parodying the like insanity of the Cold War. And I do think like the core plot line of it's all like basically what Fujiko's doing. Like Lupin weirdly feels like kind of in the background in the terms of like the show is not interested in the episode is not interested at all in his like attempt to try to steal this like pirate gold at the bottom of the ocean. That's so far in the background. It's so completely about Fujiko dealing with like the secret spy organizations of every fucking country on the world trying to auction this off. There's a very great sequence in the middle where she just keeps on running into, it's like Mossad and it's MI6 and now it's the KGB. And then the best part is when the CIA show up and there are all these like, hippies with like yellow shirts that just say CIA and they're all like dancing around. They all seem high. The main CIA guy is just a dude named Robert, who also is voiced by Toshio Furukawa, like Piccolo, which is fucking great. It's like, okay, it's Robert voiced by Furukawa and he's just the CIA
We'll see
man.
him again next week.
Yes. I mean, he's a CIA dude with the CIA on his shirt. And it's incredibly silly. It's very wacky. I also love the hilariously inappropriately small amount of money that Fujiko's trying to get for this nuclear sub. It's like her initial offer she accepts is for $10 million, and then it like slowly gets raised until eventually it's at $150 million. But that is also just like a comically tiny amount of money. I looked it up after watching the episode, and when you're looking at how expensive a nuclear sub is, you're talking about billions of dollars. Like you're talking about $1 to like $7-8 billion to like build these fucking things, and the idea that she is going to sell it and be satisfied for $10 million after she tricked Lupin into stealing a nuclear sub is just like it feels like the people making the anime, it's before the internet, and they didn't bother to go try to like research, and maybe that information might not have been particularly like accessible in the mid 80s, I guess, as it is now. But it's just like $10 million is so little money for stealing a nuclear fucking submarine from the KGB.
Here's the Congressional Budget Office. This is 2019 dollars, but not that different. Says that a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine will cost $5.5 billion apiece. Fujiko, I think, could ask for more. And given how greedy she is, you think she would. But there you go. She's not trying to push it too far. No, I love all of that. I love when she is running into the MI6. She says, if you're scouting Bond girls, I'm not interested, which is a great line. Really, this is just a very good Fujiko episode. I love all of that. I love that she has, like, fucking convinced Lupin. Like, it just speaks to how much Lupin will do for this woman, that he has now stolen a KGB atomic sub, which is, like, the most dangerous thing they've ever done. It's so crazy. I like it. It's a very silly farce, but it's good. It does not have any of the kind of self-conscious, this is the end of the show feeling that the end of part 1 or the end of part 2 have with its final episode, but it is, I think, a good one to close on that feels fairly representative of at least the later episodes of part 3.
Yeah, it definitely has, like, the animation at this point is so incredibly stylized. Like, they have, like, pushed it very, very far, and I'm pretty into the way that it looks. It's just a fun... It's a weird, fun, farcical episode to end on that it almost like fits that this episode is the one that gets this very bizarre thing tacked onto the end of it, of this lady just saying, and that's it. Thanks for watching. This is our 50 episodes of Lupin III Part 3. This is the last one. Bye-bye. It's like, okay, we're done. Yep. It kind of works.
Japanimation Station.
So, Sean, do you want to finish today by talking about the movie for Lupin III Part 3, The Legend of the Gold of Babylon?
Yes, let's talk a bit about the legendary gold that is of Babylon. That is also actually of New York City. That might be from aliens, or God, or both, depending on how you interpret it.
All right, so let's go through the history here of the third theatrical Lupin III film. In 1984, which is the year Part 3 premiered, they start thinking about doing a movie. And this is also the time when Hayao Miyazaki has just come off the critical and commercial success of Nausicaa. So he is the person they first go to, and they offer him, hey, do you want to come back and direct a film for us that'll come out in summer of 1985? Miyazaki turns them down, but Mamoru Oshii happened to be in his office that day, and he recommended Oshii to TMS. Now, Mamoru Oshii, we all know now for Ghost in the Shell and Pat Labor and stuff like that. At the time, he had just finished his run on the original Urusei Yatsura anime, the Rumiko Takahashi show. And Oshii does agree to come in and give a pitch. And this is the pitch he gave. A young woman, a client of Lupin, makes a mysterious request. A crazed architect builds a Tower of Babel-like structure in the heart of Tokyo, and upon its completion, leaps from its peak to his demise. Then Lupin chooses not to steal gems or money, but a fossil, that of an angel. But the fossil turned out to be a fake, and in actuality, it was plutonium. Lupin's touch obliterated Tokyo. Wait, false alarm, it was a non-functioning atomic bomb, and Lupin was never truly there. Lupin never existed from the start of it all, and maybe he never did. This work will conclude the Lupin series. That is the greatest pitch for anything I've ever heard. Oh my god. Can you imagine that, Sean?
That's just straight down the middle. That's just a very conventional Lupin III type heist. I don't think there's anything weird about it at all.
Can you imagine someone like coming into like the James Bond offices being like, this work will conclude the 007 series. Just like, we're done. Alongside this pitch, Oshii commissioned concept art by Yoshitaka Amino, the Final Fantasy artist who did all the art for the classic games. Amazing artist. But even with Amino's touch, TMS obviously didn't like this pitch. They were like, no, we're not doing that. That's a bad idea. We're not doing that. So Oshii left the project. He moved on. He was again invited to work on Lupin years later, but he declined again, did not want to do that. But some of the ideas he had in that Babylon pitch do show up in his later work, including the second Urusei Yatsura series. Some of the Pat Labor stuff, I think you can see the connection there, and the film Angel's Egg. In 1996, 1986, Oshii remarked that Lupin's ghost had last been exorcised from him after he made Patlabor 2. So, interesting little footnote. We almost got a Mamoru Oshii Lupin film. That would have been a fucking thing.
Yeah, that would have been wild. It makes sense that he did not, that did not go through. Like, it is, I love Mamoru Oshii, but he does not fit the Lupin thing at all. That is like such a weird, obviously at the time he was very young, so he didn't have like a fully established style and everything yet, but I cannot imagine what a Mamoru Oshii Lupin movie would be like. It's just so different.
Yeah. So they still had a release date that was firmly set for the summer of 1985, and the Oshii hiring and departure had been pretty public, so TMS is scrambling for a path forward. They hire the Part 3 writer that we just mentioned, Hiroshi Kashiwabara, who wound up writing the finale and a couple other episodes that we watched. And actually his first submission, this was still in 1984, was about stealing a Russian submarine. And that is the idea that got reused for the Part 3 finale, did not wind up getting used for the film. And so he was not asked to script the movie, ultimately went back to the show. They then got screenwriter Yoshio Urasawa to pen a script. He was inspired by the Tower of Babel idea from the Oshii pitch, and he wrote about that and about ancient artifacts from Babylon, but he abandoned this script midway through. And actually what's funny is that the film has an early teaser poster that is in the Discotheque release. It's the reversible cover on the actual Blu-ray. And on that initial poster, you do have Fujiko and Lupin using these like golden Babylonian spears and arrows, and apparently that was from that draft. It's not in the finished film, but that is where that comes from. And finally, they brought in Atsushi Yamatoya, the head writer of Part 2, the writer of Mystery of Mamo, the writer of several episodes of Part 3. He's the main Lupin writing guy, and he joins to finish up the script. Seijun Suzuki is also asked to come on as an advisor. He is credited as director of the film, but it has been noted by many historians that this is more of a courtesy than an accurate description of his involvement. It was in fashion at the time to hire a notable live-action filmmaker and give them an honorary director title for certain anime films, and Lupin researcher Takeshi Ikemoto says this was the case here, and that the real director is Shigetsugu Yoshida, who is co-credited as director here, and we've obviously talked about Yoshida many times on this podcast, including today. Makes sense that he would eventually rise to the level of director of one of the Lupin films. Now, Suzuki definitely had influence on the movie, and that's very obvious watching it. There's a lot of Seijun Suzuki in this, but calling him like the director in that sense probably isn't accurate, even though it is fun to say Seijun Suzuki directed a Lupin movie.
Yeah, it doesn't feel any more like anywhere near as Suzuki-ish as the episode he wrote for Part 3. Like, the movie has elements of Suzuki in there, but it is not like it is not as crazy. It does, it has some weird alien shit at the end, but the style of the movie is not that extreme.
Yeah. All of this put pretty significant pressure on the Part 3 staff, who had to animate this movie in 5 to 6 months while still producing and airing the TV series. The storyboards were done by Shigetsugu Yoshida and Hidetoshi Owashi, who also was one of the Part 3 animation directors. Your music is by Yuji Ono, as always. We've got the theme song Manhattan Joke, which was sung by Naoko Kawai. That's the Yuji Ono composition from the Part 3 era that he comes back to the most in his later Lupin works and soundtracks and jazz albums, and it is very good. I also like the Song of Babylon that is in here, and is also a really cool melody that you get as well. And overall, it is a fantastic soundtrack, I have to say. I was listening to it again this morning, and it's great. And a couple other notes. There are a few interesting actors to talk about here. One of the villains in the movie, Kowalski, is played by Chikao Otsuka, who did Goemon in Part 1 and Zenigata in the second pilot film. Willie and Chin, two of the assassins, are the manzai comedy duo Oban and Koban, who were popular in this period. And while I was researching this, I learned they had split up for many years, but they just got back together in 2021 to revive their manzai comedy act in their 70s. And I just thought, good for them. That's cool. And then you have the characters I think of as Zenigata's angels, because Zenigata has a little harem with him for this movie because he has to run the Miss ICPO beauty contest and then take those women with him on his investigation of Lupin. And they're all sort of like big names. You've got Qin Zhao, the Chinese one, is Keiko Han, who is in a million things, but we know her as Lala Soon from Gundam. Carmel is Fumi Hirano, who is the voice of Loom, the main character in Urusei Yatsura, which is kind of funny considering that Mamoru Oshii connection. But most interestingly, one of the main villains here, Marciano, is voiced by a woman named Maki Carousel, and she's an actress who was one of the first publicly out trans women in Japan. She was born male in 1942, but identified as feminine young. She ran away at 15 to work at a gay bar in Sapporo, which is where she got the name Maki Carousel. At 19, she went overseas and had sex reassignment surgery. Came back to Japan, was a popular nightclub performer and actress in the years following. In 2002, she was arrested for drug possession, but at the time, Japan still did not allow for gender change in the family registries. So she was put in a men's prison for 41 days, which brought attention to the issue, and it was the very next year, in 2003, that Japanese laws were changed to allow changing one's gender marker, in part because of this case. And she did make that change in 2004. That doesn't relate to this movie super much, but it's an interesting performance, and when I looked all this up, I was like, that's a crazy slice of history to run into Lupin here. I kind of love it. Yeah.
Yeah, that is,
and then I guess,
pretty wild.
Yeah. And then the last note I will make, I'm curious about the restoration history of this movie because the quality of the film on the Blu-ray that we have from Discotek did a great job. No problems with the mastering or anything, but it is notably the worst quality of any Lupin thing we've reviewed. Even the part 2 episodes that are standard definition DVD only look better than this. It looks like they scanned a print of the movie, not like a negative or any original source, but like a print that has dirt and lots of very heavy grain and not super deep colors. It looks fine. It's perfectly watchable, but it's definitely in rough shape, and the soundtrack is really rough. It's got very tinny voices. All of the voices are clipped, which means they peak on the S's. None of the other Lupin stuff, except maybe the pilot film, sounds like that. There is a surround remix for the Japanese version that sounds even worse because it just spreads all of that out and makes it even thinner. The soundtrack is in much worse shape. I'm very curious if this movie just has never gotten a good restoration, because it's a bummer that we can't hear the voice acting in better quality. There was a dub done in 2018, and it is actually interesting to switch over to that track, because then you can hear the music and sound effects in good quality. It sounds good over there with the dub voices, which obviously are brand new, but the actual Japanese soundtrack, I'm curious, maybe because this is one of the less popular Lupin movies, it's never gotten the attention, but I would love to see it get a proper restoration, because at a minimum, production-wise, it's a really impressive movie. It's got great music and voice acting, and that is a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah, I definitely noted that as well when I was watching it, is that, it just is not, particularly with the audio, it is not in that kind of pristine condition that if you watch Mamo, or if you watch fucking Cagliostro, those movies are preserved in really nice fashion, and those Discotek Blu-rays are, feel very definitive. And without knowing why some of that is the level of quality it is, it's hard to say if you could get a better version or whatever. But it does feel like there should be a better thing out there for Legend of the Golden Babylon, because this is definitely the weakest of the 3 movies we've watched. I don't think there's any question that this is not as good as Mamo or Cagliostro. But it's still very fun. It's a fun movie. It's a good watch. And if you're a Lupin fan, you should check it out. And it sucks that it is not in as good quality as you'd want.
Absolutely. And it is very much, we've talked about, Mystery of Mamo is really more of kind of a part 1 movie that was made during part 2, and Cagliostro is a Hayao Miyazaki movie. This one is it is the movie version of part 3, and it very much has that feeling. The Seijun Suzuki vibes really come through, I think, in the background work, in a lot of the kind of urban settings and how they do that, some of which is very fun. Honestly, my favorite part of this movie is the first 25 minutes in this club that is very Tokyo Drifter-esque, and there's this monster party going on, and then later on you have this crazy motorcycle chase with Lupin and Zenigata on this 3D billboard. We'll talk about all of that. I love all of that stuff. The plot, as maybe that series of screenwriters going through it might indicate, is all over the map. It is really a series of vignettes loosely connected by the idea of searching for the gold of Babylon, a story that spirals out into being about aliens and UFOs. But it is fun. Like, it's brilliantly animated. I think it's got a lot of amazing craft to it. You would not guess that they had to make this under the wire in 5 months just in terms of animation quality, because it looks great. Shigetsugu Yoshida obviously is one of the great Lupin directors, and I think there's a lot of really virtuosic stuff here. If you're a fan of this series, I think it's a must-watch. It's just not... It feels more like a really big TV episode than it does a proper movie, I think is what I would say about it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like they took 3 different Lupin episodes and kind of fused them together. You've got this, like, mob story, which is one. You've got the... which is honestly probably like the least relevant to everything else, but is my favorite part of the movie, which is the ICPO super babes, like the police babes, basically, and all that shit was that he got. I think is my favorite part of the movie. But that like just feels like it's its whole own Lupin episode that's just kind of happening alongside everything else. And then you've got the like gold of Babylon. So you kind of have your wacky Zenigata hijinks. You've got your kind of hard-boiled mob story, and then you've got your kind of wacky way out there, you know, National Treasure-esque, like, discovering the ancient secrets of human society thing, and, like, a sort of sci-fi fantasy bent to it, which is a mode that Lupin is in. So it kind of takes these 3 different Lupin-style stories that are 3 different kind of modes of Lupin and kind of mashes them together into this movie. So it definitely does not have anywhere near the kind of, like, cohesive, holistic narrative oomph of Mamo or Cagliostro, and it's more, I think, can just be enjoyed in that, like, I'm just like I'm just in it for like the Lupin adventure, like, and if you can just sort of enjoy it for that, it's totally fun. Even if I think I wish the movie could have done more to try to find a way to have a really strong spine that connects those elements, and instead it's more just about enjoying those elements as they come to you.
Yeah, it's probably a little less than the sum of its parts, but a lot of those parts are really good. The other way I would describe this, Sean, is it's Raiders of the Lost Ark if it was made by crazy people. That is my one-liner for this, because it has a lot of Raiders references. Like, the entire character of Marciano, who is the one looking for the Tower of Babylon that Fujiko is putting the moves on, he is Belloc. He dresses like Belloc. He looks like Belloc. It's just he is Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark. You have the scene where they're digging out in the desert and they go out at night to try to find the thing. That is all from Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a bunch of like very clear references to that, and it even like the basic setup of the plot early on. Once you get the like all the story about like God and Babylon, it's very much like the beginning of Raiders from this like very religious perspective. Now there's this artifact we're looking for, so you can feel the influence there, but it's almost more like Raiders married with the mob plotline, married with Zenigata's angels, married with 10 pounds of cocaine, because this movie is just batshit crazy, and it gets crazier as it goes along until the ending is aliens abducting the Tower of Babel from under Madison Square Garden and Lupin chopping it up with Zen Tetsuken. So now there is, I don't know, several tons of gold in the bottom of New York Harbor.
Yes. Yeah, it's wild. Almost because I don't think that there's like much of a point of trying to like break the movie down plot beat by plot beat, because it's just not the kind of movie. Since you already like have broached it, let's just talk about the fucking ending, because that's like the thing I just want to talk about, because it is absolutely wild. You know, you just have this very loose thread connecting throughout the whole film of the old lady Rosetta, who has the hots for Lupin, and she just kind of pops up occasionally and sings this weird little song about Babylon. And she's got her...
I love Rosetta. I have to say, she's one of my favorite parts of this movie. I love the little song of like, how many miles to Babylon? 70 miles and 10. And that is, there's also a joke about the scores later on we have to talk about, because it's crazy. But like that whole thing, and like her kind of having the hots for Lupin and him not knowing how to react to her, but you start getting hints that she must be like hundreds and then thousands of years old. I like all of that. I think it's cool.
Yes. Yeah, I like her as well. But yeah, so she's like sort of, but she just kind of like creeps around the edges of the movie for most of it, until you kind of get to the end where you piece it all together. That what has happened was in Babylon, you had an original Tower of Babel that seemingly was created because aliens came to Earth and made all the people in Babylon build a giant the Tower of Babel out of all their gold. which the aliens took. And they took it with their giant spaceship, and then they flew it, and as they're going away, they ended up flying over North America, over where New Manhattan is, and they ended up dropping the Tower of Babel, which embedded itself in the ground underneath where modern-day Madison Square Garden is, and has laid there dormant deep in the earth for thousands of years. Meanwhile, the people of Babylon built a second Tower of Babel, which is a detail I just fucking love. That's like, oh no, that's like the actual Tower of Babel you vaguely know about. But there was an even older Tower of Babel made out of gold, and that was the one that we're after, which is just such a ridiculously unnecessary detail. But that has been buried under Manhattan because the aliens dropped it, and then left behind Rosetta, who has been waiting on Earth. Because the aliens come by on Halley's Comet every 76 years, and she needs to find the Tower of Babel made out of gold and stand on top of it when Halley's Comet comes by with her magic candle thingy, so that way they can pick up the Tower of Babel and fly away in their spaceship that is also Halley's Comet. And that is just literally what happens at the end of the movie. There is no, like, was it really aliens or was it not aliens? Like, that's not a question here. This is just like fact of the world of Lupin III is that aliens are on Halley's Comet. Also, Halley's Comet looks like metal as fuck. And so weird, like, you only see it for very briefly, but it just looks almost like the fucking flesh monster in Akira or something like that. It's just got like weird shit sticking out of it, and it's just got like a demonic looking face, and then it turns into a UFO that like sort of becomes weirdly transparent and has this whole weird like sort of internal structure that you can see as it flashes. It's just very bizarre, and it comes to take the Tower of Babel, and then Lupin destroys the candle so that the Tower of Babel falls back into the Hudson River, I guess. And yes, it is just like, it is without a doubt, hands down, by far the most insane thing that has happened in anything in Lupin. And it's going to be like hard to top this. Like, this is way more insane than even like Jesus had a secret twin sister that was a vampire. Like, that doesn't reach this. Like, the time travel dude in part 1, that's like fucking quaint. That's what, oh, dude time traveled? Fucking whatever. Dude, aliens made a giant gold Tower of Babel and tried to steal it every 76 years on Halley's Comet. That's fucking nuts.
And it was in New York. It was under Madison Square Garden.
Yes.
I mean, the thing I really enjoy about this movie, and this is something I enjoy about a lot of Lupin stuff, but this movie I think really, in some ways it's a very pure encapsulation of it, is it's just unpredictable in a way that like most media we consume is not unpredictable in the way, certainly not in this way, but just in fundamental ways. Stories have shapes that we understand, and one of the things I love about watching and engaging with Lupin media is that it just frequently throws you curveballs that you do not see coming, like Jesus and the vampires, or like a dolphin falling in love with Lupin, or the Seijun Suzuki episode, or whatever else you want to do. And this movie absolutely is chock full of that, because its shape, broadly, is something we know. It is Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is an adventure movie. It even does the thing with the map in the middle of the movie where they're flying around the world, right? We understand all of that. But then it is so defamiliarizing in how fucking crazy it is. Because this movie is trying to marry the kind of like treasure hunt Tower of Babel story with part 3's fundamental aesthetic interest in urban settings. So the main place has to be New York. There is a middle interlude where they are in sort of Baghdad in the Middle East, and there's some really good action out in the desert. But other than that, this is a very urban film. And the thing about the Raiders of the Lost Ark shape is that you're never in a city. You're always in, maybe you're in like a big kind of town center like the Bazaar in the Middle East that they're in Raiders. But for the most part, you're out in deserts and you're in catacombs and all of that kind of stuff. And this movie's like, nah, what if we put all that beneath Madison Square Garden so we can have both? We can have the New York Mafia and we can have this crazy stuff. And why would that all work? Aliens. And I kind of love it. It's so fun to watch that unfold. There's something genuinely unhinged about it that makes this movie like, is it weaker than the other two on like, I guess, a critical level? Yes. It's so fun though. It's so crazy. I kind of love it.
Yeah, I absolutely love it too. It's just, it is so fucking bonkers, and the movie just sort of like accepts it. Like, it is, It doesn't particularly hem or haw over it. It like has a couple of lines as they build up of where like Jigen is skeptical. It's like, oh, what? It's like, were there gods or is it aliens? And Lupin's like, oh, I don't know. I don't believe in any of that stuff either. But they just kind of like roll with it. And then it happens at the end and they're like, yeah, okay. Well, I guess Rosetta was an alien all along and an alien loved me. But she has to go back to her people. But I want to keep the gold because the Tower of Babel was made by human hands. So we should keep it. Even if that means like fucking Manhattan absolutely would have been completely destroyed by the like massive tsunami created by this like massive giant tower made of solid gold falling into the river. Absolutely would have killed everybody in that area. But at least humanity gets to keep our Tower of Babel.
Now I'm imagining there should have been an episode of like Lupin the Third Part 4 or 5 or something where they recreate the Miracle on the Hudson, the Captain Sully thing where he landed in the Hudson River. But by landing in the Hudson River, they found all the gold from the Tower of Babylon. I think that would have been great. Yeah. Because, yeah. Anyway, no, it's nuts. And, yeah, I kind of love it. I kind of love how big it gets. It's just completely unapologetic about it. I mean, I hadn't seen this movie until last night, but I was familiar with, like, the movie's poster for years. And the poster has a little UFO up in the upper left-hand corner. And I'd always been curious, because the rest of this poster looks like a normal poster for a Lupin movie. It's Lupin and Fujiko, and Zenigata down at the bottom. Zenigata is surrounded by a harem of women. I don't think I, maybe recognize that before, but that is a plot point from the movie. But then there is a little UFO, and it's like, is that just a fun thing someone drew on the poster? Where does that come from in this movie? I was like, no, there is a flying saucer that is trying to steal the Tower of Babel that it buried beneath Madison Square Garden, which is now destroyed also because they pull it out through the center of it, and New York suffered like a 9/11 in reverse. Yeah. I can understand why this movie wasn't localized like in the mid-2000s, because there's a lot of New York destroying going on.
It's pretty wild because also I've watched the trailers that are on the Blu-ray version, and they just show the fucking, and this is true of a lot of like old movie trailers, whether it's Japanese or American, like they don't give a fuck about spoilers. They straight up show the whole ending with the UFO and the tower and all that shit in the trailer. It's fucking great. It's just like, that's just, and it would make you want to watch the movie. It's like, what the fuck is happening? Why is there a giant UFO lifting a giant golden tower out of Manhattan? That definitely is an image that's going to make you want to check out that film.
I think a funny experiment would be to show this movie to someone, one of the many people whose only exposure to Lupin is Castle of Cagliostro, and the only thing I would tell them is, hey, this was the next movie. This is technically the sequel to the Castle of Cagliostro. If you liked Castle of Cagliostro, you're going to love this. Here you go. And then I would just sit behind them and watch them as they watch the movie cackling. It would be great.
Yes, it would be a great social experiment for someone who's a Lupin noob to like have to reconcile these two things.
Yeah. Pretty crazy stuff. Yeah, what else have we got with this movie? Again, there's lots of great scenes. That beginning section, which is mostly completely disconnected from the movie, is very fun. The whole thing where Lupin and Zenigata are doing this crazy motorcycle chase in the middle of like Times Square, and there's this big like 3D billboard of this woman whose like tongue sticks out, and they're riding all over it. It's an incredible piece of animation. Just all of the biking going on. There's some like pseudo 3D shots as they're moving through like the tunnels in the canal. Like they go through her like ear canal and out through the nose. It goes on and on forever. But I could have like watched a whole fucking movie of it. It's like really great, like crazy cartoonantic animation. Some of the best stuff in part 3.
Yeah, no, it is like really impressive. It's unfortunate that like the billboard itself is one of those racially characterized depictions of a black person. So it's like when they're like riding the motorcycles on her like cartoonishly massive lips is like a little like, this is hard to this does not play super well. Because again, this is like a trend that like part 3 has a lot of more of that, and that I think that carries it through in the movie as well. But like the sequencing and like the idea of this whole crazy ride as like all the people are like looking up at it and they're like making bets on who's going to like is Lupin going to escape or is Zenigata going to capture him, and Fujiko makes the bet and all that stuff. Yeah, I'd say like really big wild sequence. And even like before that, like leading up to it, I love the intro to the movie where you follow Rosetta, who you don't know who she is, as she goes into this monster bar where everyone's wearing like Universal Monster masks, basically. And then you've got two guys that from behind look like Jigen and Goemon sitting at the bar, and then the camera comes around and you see their faces, and it's just like there's a quest line in Yakuza 1 and 2 where there's a guy who is dressed like Kiryu and shaking people down in that game, and then you as actual Kiryu go and like stop him. And it's a very similar thing of like the face kind of looks like the character, but not quite. And it's just a very funny effect of, yeah, it's that kind of looks like Jigen if you look at it a little cross-eyed, but it's clearly like not actually them. And then they, take off the mask and it's them. They're the two mafia dudes who are going to be in for the rest of the movie, hunting them down. Like all that, like build up to, you do not know where our actual main characters are, and then slowly you figure out that Lupin is the guy in the gorilla costume that then leads into this whole sequence. It's a really, really good, stylish intro into the movie that, it may be like from a strictly kind of like plot and like story writing perspective probably takes up too much oxygen of the movie for what it actually does. But since the whole movie is so kind of like set piece focused, it ultimately, I think, just kind of works out that you just kind of go along for the ride and enjoy the crazy animation and the wacky cartoon antics, because this has by far the most Looney Tunes bullshit in all of Lupin. There is a part where I think this is in the opening sequence and all that crazy shit that is happening. Where
dynamite
puts like dynamite, on like a rope that then swings down to Lupin, and then Lupin takes out a U-turn sign, and the dynamite stops and like looks quote unquote at the U-turn sign, and then turns around and goes back up the rope to Zenigata. And there's like, that's the most just you pulled this straight out of a fucking Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd cartoon. But there's a lot of stuff that's like that. It goes a way further with that than anything else we've seen. Like, and we've commented on some of the other movies that do a bit of that kind of cartoon logic where the car like hops up the pieces to get onto the cliff and that kind of thing. But this goes full fucking Bugs Bunny with this shit in a way that I'm way into.
And it has a lot of like really creative touches with that, because there's this movie also does have a big virtuosic car chase in it, just like Mamo and Cagliostro. This one is, I guess you could consider the motorcycle chase one of them, but then also out in the desert, there's an entire chase sequence that's very cartoony, and also I think must be an homage to the opening animation of Part 2, where the first theme song of Part 2 is them driving in the desert, and there's a lot of clear like matches to that sort of choreography, but now in the middle of a full big chase that we get. Yeah, there's a ton of that. There's this whole thing where Lupin, there's the big gold lion statue they get that he winds up flying away with a kite on and all of that. But no, it's all over the movie. And yeah, there's a lot of really creative and silly and awesome animation. There's the whole fucking recurring bit about Kowalski spanking his underlings with the fly swatter of death. Like, that's very Bugs Bunny. All of it. One of my favorite gags. This isn't, I don't know if this even qualifies as Bugs Bunny because it ends in actual murder, but there's the whole thing where Lupin comes in threatening Kowalski and he says, I have this box in my hand, and if I squeeze it, it'll blow us all to kingdom come. And Kowalski's like, you wouldn't do that because you wouldn't threaten Fujiko. And so Lupin drops the box and he sees it's cigars, and it's like, it's just cigars. And then like 20 minutes later in the movie, Kowalski thinks he's won, and he's like, I need a smoke. And he's out of cigarettes, so he picks up one of the cigars and lights it, and it blows up and kills him. So Lupin was not lying at all. It just fucking kills him. It blows up
the entire building. Like, it doesn't just kill him. Like, the whole fucking building collapses. Like, Lupin was not fucking around. Like, that, it's pretty crazy. Because that's like how the bad guy gets killed. It's pretty wild, because it feels almost throwaway, but it is set up so well that, it's a really great moment.
Yeah. It's got a great sense of humor. There's this bit of writing near the end of the movie where Fujiko and Lupin are together, and they've figured out kind of the plot about the aliens and all this stuff, and they have this call and response that I just about died at, where Fujiko goes, why did God try to steal gold? He likes it. What would he use it for? He'd use it for money, don't you think? Huh? God uses money too? Indeed he does. What does he use it for? To buy the things he wants. What does he do when he buys the things he wants? He gobbles them up. I just died. It's so funny. It's such a good, and of course, the two actors are their chemistry is so good at this point. Oh my God, it's hilarious.
Yeah, I really loved that exchange as well. It is pretty wild. And then, of course, you have the whole side of the movie, which is that Zenigata is pulled off of the case to hunt down Lupin so that he can manage the ICPO policewoman beauty contest, which is like basically like a Miss like Earth or like Miss Universe kind of beauty contest that takes policewomen from all the different countries on Earth and then has them compete in a beauty contest. And Zenigata oversees that. And then the results of the beauty contest are that it's Miss Lasagna from Italy wins, and then all the other contestants are upset because they think that it's bullshit. And so in order to appease them, he reinstates Zenigata onto the Lupin case and then assigns all of the beauty contest contestants to work with him to like get Lupin. Like, it is such like a long, weird sequence to set up a thing that is so irrelevant to the rest of the plot, but it's like the best part of the whole movie. Like, I love all those weird characters. The performances of the character designs are so good. They are introduced in a way that I think at first felt a bit uncomfortable, but I think they end up undercutting it well in that kind of racially characterized way of where they come on and it's like they're just say like, oh, the Chinese one says ni hao, ni hao, ni hao, and that's it. But then when you get the characters actually talking, I think you realize, oh, the characters themselves were playing up the bit of the ditzy beauty pageant contestant in order to win the beauty pageant. It's not like the movie is not depicting it as this is just what Chinese people are like. And
right.
So I think that like it works out well, like the joke plays. Because at first I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to deal with this now. But it honestly, it's better at that than say like a G Gundam, where it is able to undercut some of that stuff. But yeah, but then for the rest of the movie, they're just like with Zenigata, and then eventually like they just kind of try to abandon Zenigata and capture Lupin anyways. And that leads to my favorite scene in the movie, which is the big chase in the desert where they're all in tanks chasing after Lupin, which I think is probably like the big set piece that stands out to me. And yeah, it is absolutely 100% completely disconnected. They never try to make it hook up to the Babylon stuff basically at all. They don't even really give any proper payoff to the that the Chinese one falls in love with Goemon, which that's like a subplot that just sort of fizzles out and doesn't really go anywhere. And yet, like,
but it's so fun along the way.
I still had a good time with it. It's like the movie probably could be ultimately a lot better if it had found a way to wrangle its disparate parts into something that culminated together in a way that felt very satisfying. But the disparate parts themselves are so fun to engage with and to watch that it's like it's not that big of a deal. Like I think the movie could be better than it is, but it's still extremely enjoyable because all of those weird, wacky scenes are so much fun on their own.
Honestly, the more we talk about it, the more I'm convinced I wouldn't have it any other way. Like, there's something so special about how shaggy this one is. And honestly, it's like a good representation of Part 3. Like, this is what a Part 3 movie should be. Just a little bit kind of, it's got some screws loose and it's all over the map. And like, could you make a shorter, more focused movie not doing the Miss ICPO thing? Yes. Would it be as fun? Oh, fuck no. It's so fun. It's so great. The last big moment between Goemon and Shinjao is this great scene where it's during the whole tank sequence where he gets out Zantetsuken and cuts the tank apart, but he does it very carefully so she is left completely unharmed, and he says, I cannot cut flowers with Zantetsuken. That's great. I wouldn't trade that for the world. So there's just a bunch of stuff like that, and it is silly, and it is all over the map, and it does stuff like Marciano is like just killed randomly by Kowalski in one scene, even though he had been kind of the big bad up to that point, but now Kowalski is. You know, it's all over the map, and then of course it ends with a woman saying, thank you, Lupin. I am an alien, and turns out to be an alien goddess. It's wild, but I love it. It's so singular. There's no other franchise that would give you a movie like this.
Yes, that is definitely true. It is completely insane. I mean, one other part that's just weird as fuck is with the Marciano character. He seems to have like these like haunting psychic visions of the Babylonian gold lion that he's like painting early on and stuff. And then he like has this sort of like breakdown later on. And then when Lupin goes to the tower to try to save Fujiko, he has her dressed up as the gold lion there. And it's
Yes,
like,
that was so weird.
legitimately the most disturbing thing. Like, we've watched Goemon get brutally fucking tortured, but that doesn't, like, even come close to how, like, unsettling it is to see Fujiko sort of stripped down. Like, you can tell that she's not wearing any clothes underneath this, like, half lion costume she has on with, like, the wings, and she's there next to the actual gold lion. It's like, this is fucked up. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what your deal is, Marciano, and we never find out because he gets killed by the fly swatter of death like 5 seconds later. But it's pretty fucked up.
Another bit I love is Lupin also gets a crazy vision when he is in the, like, ruins and he falls into the hole and he has, like, his dream about, and that's where we learn that Rosetta is, like, the goddess and all that. The lead up to that scene, though, is that Lupin keeps falling into pits when he's going through these ruins. He falls into one and almost gets impaled. He falls into another, and then he's like, there must be a pattern. And so he starts singing the song, you know, how many miles to Babylon? 60 miles and 10. And he says, a score also means a mark or a hole, so there must be 3 pits. And I was like, this is Batman 66 logic. I can totally imagine Adam West talking to Burt Warden going, Robin, what's another word for score? It's a mark or a hole. So 60 and 10, that must mean there's a 3rd pit. And it's just pure batshit insanity, and I love it.
Well, I mean, it's Batman 1966 if the people who wrote Batman 1966 had English as their second language, because that's also...
Yes, exactly.
That's not really what you mean when you say, like, a score, like a marking, does not... No English-speaking person would ever associate that with the kind of holes they mean, and so it's just like...
They're homonyms, but they have no relation to each other, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a completely fucking insane way to interpret English that no English-speaking person would do. Someone absolutely just sort of, like, looked that up in a dictionary and thought, oh, that would work out. And also, like, honestly, in the visual sequence that then plays out afterwards, it still doesn't even really make sense because the whole rest of the hallway just collapsed. And it's like the whole thing is just a giant hole. So it's like he doesn't, like, avoid a specific hole because he knows, oh, I know there's going to be 3 holes. It's like, no, the whole hallway is collapsing anyway. So it's like, it's just such a weird piece of dialogue. I feel like they threw in there that makes no sense in kind of any angle you interpret it.
I also do like that the lyrics to the song is, how many miles to Babylon? 60 and 10. That's only 70 miles. A score is just 20. That's only 70 miles. If you're like, I'm 70 miles to Babylon. Oh, that's great. You're almost there. That's kind of a weird, I don't know. I wonder if they thought score meant more than it does. Like 77 years ago. He just meant 87 years ago, guys. It's not that far to Babylon if you're only 70 miles away.
Because is it supposed to be the distance between Babylon and New York City? Like, what is the song, like, contextually for Rosetta? Like, what is that distance meant to be actually in the song is definitely an open question, because yes, it's like, it's 70 miles. It's like, oh, it's like an hour drive to get to get to Babylon from here. Yeah, the song is very silly. Like, I love the commitment to making it English, you know? And the lady sings it in English and she does a very good job. Like, it's actually, honestly, her English singing pronunciation is very good. But it kind of doesn't make sense when you think about it.
Another little scene I just have to mention I love is there's this scene where Lupin is at the computer working and he's going chon 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 as he types. And it's such a great Yasuo Yamada moment. The scene then turns into Goemon, and Goemon kind of gets mad because he thinks this whole thing is kind of stupid and leaves. And then Jigen gets up to leave, and Lupin, like, lashes at him like, you're leaving me too, you don't want to get it? And then Jigen turns and says, nobody said I'm not in. We're just out of cognac. And I died. That is such a great Kiyoshi Kobayashi Jigen line. Nobody said I'm not in. We're just out of cognac. And I did, after finishing the movie, I went back and watched a couple of scenes with the dub, in part just to appreciate the sound design is better in that version because they were able to go back to the original tracks. But I did listen to that scene. Tony Oliver did recreate the whole chon 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 thing, which was very funny. And I did understand immediately why people like Richard Epcar as Jigen, because he did that line fucking perfect, where he was talking to Lupin like he's a small child. It'd be like, no one said I'm not in, Lupin. We're just out of cognac, which is fucking great.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a very good joke, because it's just like how hard Lupin goes into him about this thing, because it's like a 2-minute rant he has. He's just like, hey man, like, we're out of cognac.
Yeah. Any other stray observations about this incredibly weird movie?
I don't know. It is just like, it's such a sort of like all over the place experience. I don't know if they have much to say about the big train scene in the middle. I think is like kind of the only big sequence we didn't talk about, where that's like one of the main places where the ICPO babes show up. That is also a fun scene where Lupin is an absolute horn dog, and they like basically wink at him once, and he just like jumps across the aisle and starts hanging out with them. But yeah, it's just a wild, crazy movie. It's just a good time. If you like Lupin, if you like the sense of humor in this franchise and the characters, it is not like the most refined piece of Lupin in the canon or whatever, but it is an extremely enjoyable one.
And sometimes you don't want refined Lupin, Sometimes you want it all over the place. One other thing on that train scene I did want to mention is they have a fun... So both Mystery of Mamo and Castle of Cagliostro have this moment where Goemon comes out, cuts a big object, and does the line, "I have cut another worthless object," which he doesn't do a ton on the TV show, but he does in both of those movies. And Cagliostro parodies that moment from Mamo where he cuts off Lupin's clothes. In this, they have a fun call in response to that where he cuts Chin and Willy out of their Jigen and Goemon costumes, and then Jigen starts saying the line, and Goemon cuts him off and says, "Don't say it." I laughed at that. And then Jigen gets the moment where instead of Goemon cutting the helicopter in half up on the train when they're being chased by the attack helicopter, Jigen just has one shot from his magnum that blows the helicopter apart. And I liked that as kind of a misaligned expectation. It was fun.
Yeah, we've seen Goemon dispatch dozens of helicopters at this point. It's time for Jigen to have, a couple of helicopters under his belt.
Yeah, I love Lupin III so fucking much, Sean. And I love the Pink Jacket era. I love Part 3. I love this movie. I think... I'd be curious. I didn't do a deep dive into like the Japanese internet to see what they think about the Pink Jacket Adventures. I have to imagine its reputation in America is more due to the fact that it was never dubbed and was harder to get. Because I think if you actually get into it, like I can't imagine anyone who likes Lupin media not enjoying this era of the show. It's awesome.
Yeah, like my impression is that it is a show that has kind of gone over a somewhat similar arc in Japan, that like the little bit that I have seen is kind of indicated that it was overlooked at the time, partially because like, as you noted, the production stuff, like it was fairly underwatched because it had this like weird fucking thing with it being opposite baseball. And so it got delayed and there was like no consistent schedule, which is a good way to kill your TV show. Even if it's something like this where you don't have a lot of continuity, that still is just kind of like a rough way for people to try to watch the show. But in the modern era where it's like available on streaming and people can go check it out and stuff, it definitely, I feel like its reputation has gotten better. Because it is a really good show, and you can just watch it on its own terms now, which was not an easy thing to do with TV back in the day. So it is, I think it is like a fully worthy entry into the Lupin III, and it goes toe to toe. Like the best episodes that we talked about today, like the Seijun Suzuki episode, are as good as any of the stuff in Part 1 or Part 2. So it absolutely is up there with the greats as far as I'm concerned.
One note I do want to make, if you're watching Part 3, it is on Crunchyroll. They have, like, really old DVD masters of Part 3 that are in terrible shape. They were clearly made for overscan TVs because they have, like, the tape cut marks at the top and the bottom of the frame on every single cut. And if you're sensitive to that, like me, you notice it. It's stuff that, like, you normally, on an old TV, it would have been cropped out by overscanning, but you see now. And they also lack the next episode previews, and they also bring in the second opening earlier than it originally aired. So the Crunchyroll masters are a little off. The subtitles are also much worse. But Discotek does have a Blu-ray, nice affordable set. They look great. It's a really good Blu-ray set, as always, from Discotek. Doesn't have a dub because this show was never dubbed, and it would be obviously very expensive to do a whole 50-episode dub of this, but it's there, and I did just want to shout that out.
Yes, and I'm definitely planning on going back, and I'll probably eventually watch through all of Part 3, because one thing that's nice about it, one, I own the Blu-ray, and, you can't, for Part 2, you'd have to buy a lot of very expensive DVDs to own that whole show on home media. But also 50 episodes. 50 episodes is like a consumable quantity of anime in a way that I'm excited to eventually go through. Like when we watched Part 2, there were a lot of episodes that I saw the Next On preview, and I'm like, Fuck. I remember there was
Yeah.
one early on that said it's like, oh, there's like a pirate queen that Lupin fights or something. It's like, oh man, I want to watch that one, but I don't have time. So this is definitely one I'm looking forward to go back and check out some of those episodes we skipped over.
All right, so should I go ahead and tell the kids what we're watching next time, Sean?
Yes, so what are we doing next time? So we're done with all the big original TV shows, Jonathan. So what's up next for Lupin III?
Well, I'm calling the next episode Lupin III in Transition because there are multiple transitions going on, including voice actors and sort of medium. We're going to be talking about 2 movies and 2 TV specials because we're getting into the era where Lupin moved into an annual TV special as its main way of releasing content. But before that, let me go in order of what we're watching. The first thing we're watching is the 4th movie, The Fuma Conspiracy from 1987. You'll sometimes see this listed as an OVA. It sort of was, but then it wound up getting a theatrical release first. And in Japan, it is just considered the 4th movie. It is not like siloed as an OVA. But that one is weird because it has an alternate voice cast. None of the original actors are in there. Yuji Ono didn't do the music. But the alternate voice cast is people like Toshio Furukawa as Lupin and Banjo Ginga as Jigen. So we have to fucking watch it. It sounds great.
Yeah.
So we will watch
Hell
that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Then we will watch the first TV special that they did in 1989, Bye Bye Lady Liberty, directed by Osamu Dezaki. And I'm just super curious to see how Lupin made that transition into feature-length TV specials. Then we will watch the 5th special, Voyage to Danger, also known as Orders to Assassinate Lupin, from 1993. This was the 5th special, and it was directed by Masaki Osumi, who was the original director of Part 1. This is his only return to the franchise. It's a pretty acclaimed special. I'm very excited to see it. And then we will watch the 5th film, Farewell to Nostradamus. And this is the first appearance of the second voice of Lupin III because Yasuo Yamada did sadly pass away after Voyage to Danger and the subsequent special, Dragon of Doom. And Kenichi Kurita takes over at this point as Lupin. So we will hear 3 different voices of Lupin III next week and settle into the 2nd generation, 3rd generation Lupin by the end of the episode. I think it's going to be a really exciting one.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into these. It'll be nice to, I've enjoyed watching the TV shows, but it'll be nice to not have to do like such huge episode loads and be able to focus on a tighter set of different stories. I'm very curious to hear. I probably maybe have heard like in clips in passing, but I cannot like picture in my head what a different voice for Lupin. So I'm very curious to hear 2 different takes on Lupin that we'll have for next episode. And then also, we're going to get into the 90s, and I've loved the 80s vibes for Lupin, but, I'm hoping, that the grunge era for Lupin has a lot for us. I'm expecting a lot of distressed denim. I think is going to be pretty cool.